Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Quiet Life. Jack Hudson stood in the doorway of his workshop, watching his 8-year-old daughter Emma chase fireflies in the fading Texas twilight. The sprawling ranch house behind him seemed peaceful enough. White picket fence, manicured lawn, the American dream wrapped in mortgage payments and Sunday barbecues. But Jack knew better than most that appearances could be deceiving. At 42, Jack had built what most would call a successful life. Owner of Hudson Security Consulting, he provided personal protection and security systems for wealthy clients across the Southwest. His neighbors saw him as the quiet, dependable type, a former Army veteran who'd settled into suburban tranquility with his wife Darla and their daughter. They had no idea that Jack's military service had been far from conventional, or that his consulting work involved skills most civilians couldn't fathom. "Daddy, look," Emma called out, cupping her small hands around a captured firefly. "I got one." Jack smiled, the kind of genuine expression that had become rarer over the past year. "Let go, sweetheart. They're prettier when they're free." Emma released the firefly and watched it dance away into the darkness. It was a simple moment, but Jack filed away like he did all precious things, carefully, knowing how quickly they could be lost. Inside the house, Darla Hudson moved through their kitchen with practiced efficiency, preparing dinner with the kind of mechanical precision that spoke of routine rather than passion. At 36, she remained beautiful in that carefully maintained way that required gym memberships and salon appointments. Her auburn hair fell in perfect waves, and her figure still turned heads at the country club. But Jack had noticed the subtle changes over the past 6 months. The way her phone was always face down on the counter. The mysterious girl's nights out that seemed to multiply. The carefully constructed explanations for her whereabouts that had too many details to be spontaneous. Jack Hudson was a man who made his living by noticing details others missed. In Fallujah, a misplaced shadow could mean the difference between coming home and coming home in a box. In his current line of work, reading people was still a matter of survival, just with different stakes. "Dinner's ready," Darla called out, her voice carrying that slightly forced cheerfulness that had become her default tone around him. As they sat around the dinner table, Emma chattered about her day at school while Darla's attention drifted. Jack watched his wife check her phone twice during their daughter's story about the class hamster. The second time, he caught the ghost of a smile on her lips before she quickly composed herself. "So, Jack," Darla said, cutting in her chicken with surgical precision, "I was thinking of taking Emma to visit Dad next weekend. You know how he's been asking to see more of her." Howard Carpenter, Darla's father, owned a sprawling ranch about 3 hours north. The old man had never particularly liked Jack, though he'd been civil enough during the courtship and early marriage. Howard was old-school Texas, born on the land, raised on the land, and suspicious of anyone who hadn't been. "That sounds fine," Jack said evenly. "About a client consultation, anyway." It was a lie, but a necessary one. Jack had learned to create space in his schedule for surveillance work when needed. And lately, he needed it more often. After dinner, as Darla helped Emma with her homework, Jack retreated to his study. The room looked like any successful businessman's office. Mahogany desk, leather chairs, walls lined with books and framed certificates. But behind the false wall concealed by a bookshelf, Jack maintained a different kind of office. High-grade surveillance equipment, tactical gear, and files on various subjects of interest. Tonight, he pulled out a manila folder labeled DH Surveillance, Phase 1. The photographs told a story that Darla thought she was keeping secret. Her lunch meetings with Brett Wolfe had started innocently enough. Chance encounters at the coffee shop, brief conversations in public places. But over the past 2 months, those meetings had moved to more private locations. Hotels, his apartment, long drives in his car. Brett Wolfe was a real estate developer, successful and charismatic in that aggressive way that appealed to some women. Divorced, no kids, and with a reputation around town for being a player. Jack had done his research on Brett the moment the first photograph showed something more than friendly conversation. What Darla didn't know was that Jack had been documenting everything from the beginning. Every meeting, every lie, every moment of what she thought was secret passion. He had audio recordings, GPS tracking data, and enough photographic evidence to end their marriage in any court in Texas. But Jack Hudson wasn't interested in a simple divorce. The phone buzzed on his desk. A text from his contact at the phone company, someone who owed him a favor from his consulting work. The message was brief, package delivered. All calls and texts now routing through your system. Jack smiled for the second time that day, though this expression would have been far less comforting to his daughter. Phase 2 could begin. As he locked the files away, Jack heard Darla putting Emma to bed upstairs. Their daughter's laughter echoed down the hallway, followed by Darla's softer voice reading a bedtime story. It was such a normal domestic sound, the kind of moment that made some men reconsider their plans. Jack Hudson was not some man. He learned long ago that betrayal came in many forms. Sometimes it was an enemy combatant pretending to be a friendly local. Sometimes it was a partner who sold you out for the right price. And sometimes it was the woman who'd sworn to love, honor, and cherish you, sharing your bed while planning a different future. The difference was that in his previous life, betrayal was expected, planned for, accepted as part of the operational environment. In civilian life, people called it marriage. They wrote vows about it, made promises about it, built entire lives on the assumption that it meant something. Jack had believed in those promises once. He'd trusted that the woman who'd said yes to his proposal, who'd cried happy tears at their wedding, who'd held his hand in the delivery room when Emma was born, meant what she'd said about forever. Now he knew better. As the house settled into quiet, Jack made his way upstairs. Darla was already in bed, seemingly asleep, though he noticed the way her breathing wasn't quite deep enough to be genuine. Her phone lay on a nightstand, charging and innocent-looking. What she didn't know was that every text, every call, every secret communication was now being copied to Jack's secure server. Tomorrow, he would begin to understand the full scope of her betrayal. And more importantly, he would begin to understand what Brett Wolfe meant to her. Because Jack Hudson had learned something important during his years in dark corners of the world. The best revenge wasn't just about punishment. It was about complete and total destruction of everything the target valued most. As he lay in the darkness next to his unfaithful wife, Jack began to plan. Chapter 2: Unraveling Threads. 3 weeks later, Jack sat in his truck outside Brett Wolfe's downtown office, watching through high-powered binoculars as his wife emerged from the building's parking garage. Even from a distance, he could see the flush in her cheeks, the slightly mussed hair she was attempting to smooth back into place. The surveillance equipment he'd installed in Brett's car and office had provided Jack with more than enough evidence of the affair. But evidence wasn't his goal anymore. Understanding was. Through the intercepted communications, Jack had learned that Darla and Brett weren't just having a physical affair. They were making plans. Real plans. Plans that involved Emma. The audio from yesterday's meeting still echoed in Jack's mind. Darla's voice, breathless and excited, talking about how they could be together if they handled the Jack situation properly. Brett's response had been equally telling. Casual mention of a private investigator he knew who could dig up dirt on Jack's consulting work, paint him as an unfit father. They weren't just betraying him. They were planning to take his daughter. Jack's hands tightened on the steering wheel as he watched Darla drive away, probably heading home to prepare dinner and ask about his day with that same false smile she'd perfected. His phone buzzed. A text from Howard Carpenter, Darla's father. Need to talk. Come by the ranch tonight. Alone. Interesting. Jack had been monitoring Howard's communications too, as a matter of thoroughness. The old man had been having regular conversations with Brett Wolfe over the past month. Conversations that hadn't included Darla. Jack had initially assumed Howard was ignorant of his daughter's affair, but the intercepted calls suggested something far more complex. Howard Carpenter, it seemed, had his own agenda. That evening, Jack told Darla he had to meet a potential client out of town and might be late. She accepted the explanation with what seemed like genuine relief, probably eager for the free time to text with Brett without hiding her phone. The drive to Howard's ranch took Jack through increasingly remote countryside. The Carpenter family had owned this land for generations, and Howard had expanded it over the years into a sprawling operation that included cattle, oil leases, and enough acreage to get lost in. Jack found Howard on the wraparound porch of the main house, a glass of bourbon in his weathered hands. At 71, Howard Carpenter was still a formidable man, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that came from decades of commanding respect through force of will. Jack, Howard nodded, gesturing to a second chair and a waiting glass. Thanks for coming. Howard. Jack accepted the drink, but didn't sit. What's this about? The older man studied him for a long moment. You know, I never much liked you when Darla first brought you around. Too quiet, too careful. Seemed like the type who was always thinking 3 moves ahead. And now I'm thinking that might be exactly what this family needs. Howard reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope, setting it on the table between them. Open it. Inside were photographs. Brett Wolfe entering and leaving various locations around town. But these weren't Jack's surveillance photos. The angles and quality were different. Someone else had been watching Brett. How long have you known? Jack asked. About Darla's affair? Since it started. About Brett's real plans. Howard's expression darkened. That took a little longer to figure out. Jack waited. Howard Carpenter wasn't the type to reveal information without a reason. Brett Wolfe isn't just sleeping with my daughter, Howard continued. He's been researching our family for months. Our holdings, our assets, our weaknesses. He's been using his real estate connections to quietly option land around my property. Small parcels, different buyers, but they all trace back to companies he controls. The pieces were starting to form a larger picture. He's planning a land grab. More than that, he's planning to force me into bankruptcy. Howard's voice carried decades of controlled anger. Brett's got inside information about oil leases that are coming up for renewal. He's been positioning himself to undercut my bids, buy out my neighboring properties, and basically box me into a corner where I'll have to sell to him at a fraction of what this land is worth. And Darla, my daughter, is a romantic fool. She thinks Brett loves her, that they're going to run away together and start fresh. What she doesn't know is that Brett's been feeding her information to use against me. Every time she comes to visit, she asks questions about my business, my finances, my plans. I thought she was just taking an interest in the family operation. Howard drained his bourbon and set the glass down with controlled force. Brett Wolfe is using my daughter to destroy everything I've built. And when he's done with that, he'll discard her like yesterday's newspaper. Jack studied the older man carefully. Why are you telling me this? Because you're the only one who can stop him. I've seen your military records, Jack. I know who you really are, what you really did over there. Darla might have married you thinking she was getting a simple security consultant, but I know better. The admission hung between them like a challenge. Howard Carpenter had done his own research. I also know, Howard continued, that you've been conducting surveillance on your wife and her lover. I know you've got evidence of the affair. And I know you're not the type of man who takes betrayal lying down. Jack remained silent, but his mind was racing. Howard's revelation added new dimensions to his own plans for revenge. This wasn't just about a cheating wife anymore. It was about a complex web of deception that threatened everything Jack valued. What are you proposing? Jack asked finally. A partnership. You want revenge on the people who betrayed you. I want to protect what's mine and see Brett Wolfe destroyed. We can help each other. And Darla, Howard's expression hardened. My daughter made her choice. She chose to betray her husband and conspire against her own family. She'll face the consequences of that choice. Jack considered the offer. Howard Carpenter was offering resources, local knowledge, and what amounted to permission to pursue his own agenda against Darla and Brett. But accepting the offer would mean trusting a man he barely knew, and Jack Hudson trusted very few people. I need details, Jack said. Everything you know about Brett's plans, his associates, his timeline. Everything you know about Darla's involvement. Howard smiled for the first time that evening. I was hoping you'd say that. Over the next 2 hours, Howard laid out a comprehensive picture of Brett Wolfe's scheme. The man wasn't just a successful real estate developer. He was a sophisticated predator who'd used similar tactics to acquire properties across 3 states. He identified families with valuable holdings, found their weak points, and exploited them through a combination of financial pressure and personal manipulation. In the Carpenter family's case, Darla had been the perfect target. Married to a man she'd grown bored with, feeling neglected and unappreciated, she'd been vulnerable to Brett's particular brand of charm, and her access to family information had made her invaluable. The irony, Howard said, refilling their glasses, is that Darla thinks she's rebelling against me by having this affair. She has no idea she's helping Brett destroy everything she'll inherit someday. When does he make his move? Jack asked. Soon. The oil lease renewals are next month. If Brett's going to force me into a corner, he'll need to have all his pieces in place by then. Jack nodded slowly. A plan was beginning to form in his mind. Something far more sophisticated and brutal than simple revenge against a cheating spouse. If Brett Wolfe wanted to play games with other people's lives, Jack would show him what a real player looked like. I'm in, Jack said finally. But we do this my way, and when it's over, everyone who betrayed us pays the full price. Howard raised his glass. To justice, then. To retribution, Jack corrected. As they drank, Jack was already thinking ahead to the next phase of his plan. Brett Wolfe had made a critical error in judgment. He'd seen Jack as an obstacle to be removed, a simple suburban husband who could be outmaneuvered through legal tricks and social pressure. What Brett didn't understand was that Jack Hudson had spent years in places where the consequences of underestimating your enemy were measured in body bags. He learned to think not just strategically, but ruthlessly. And he learned that the most effective revenge wasn't just about winning. It was about ensuring your enemies never had the chance to threaten you again. By the time Jack drove home that night, his original plan had evolved into something far more comprehensive. Brett Wolfe wanted to destroy the Carpenter family fortune and steal Jack's wife and daughter. Jack would let him think he was succeeding, right up until the moment he destroyed Brett's life completely. Chapter 3. The Setup. 2 weeks after his meeting with Howard, Jack sat in his study reviewing the final details of what he'd begun thinking of as Operation Firefly, named after the insect Emma had caught and released, a reminder of his daughter's innocent wisdom about letting beautiful things go free. The surveillance had revealed more than Jack had initially expected. Brett Wolfe's scheme involved not just land acquisition, but a complex network of shell companies, bribed officials, and intimidation tactics. More importantly, Jack had discovered that Brett had done this before, leaving a trail of broken families and stolen fortunes across the Southwest. But Brett had never encountered someone like Jack Hudson. The plan Jack had developed was elegantly simple in concept, brutally complex in execution. Rather than expose Brett's crimes or fight him in court, Jack would let Brett's own greed and arrogance destroy him. The key was giving Brett exactly what he thought he wanted, while ensuring that getting it would cost him everything. Phase 1 had already begun. Using his security consulting contacts, Jack had fed carefully crafted misinformation into the intelligence networks that Brett relied on. False reports about Howard's financial situation, fabricated documents suggesting the old man was more vulnerable than he actually was, and misleading information about upcoming oil lease opportunities. Brett had taken the bait eagerly, accelerating his timeline and committing more resources to what he believed would be his biggest score yet. Phase 2 involved Darla directly. Through the intercepted communications, Jack knew that Brett was pressuring Darla to convince her father to make certain financial decisions that would actually benefit Brett's acquisition plans. What Darla didn't know was that her father was aware of her attempts at manipulation and was feeding her information designed to mislead Brett. But Phase 3 was where Jack's true skills would come into play. And for that, he needed everything to happen at Howard's ranch on ground of their choosing. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Darla announced at dinner that she wanted to take Emma to visit Grandpa Howard for an extended weekend, Friday through Monday. Brett, she explained, had business meetings in Dallas and wouldn't be around anyway. That sounds like a great idea, Jack said, maintaining the same supportive tone he'd used throughout their marriage. Emma loved spending time at the ranch. What Darla didn't know was that Jack had arranged Brett's business meetings through a shell company, creating a false real estate opportunity that would require Brett's immediate attention. The beauty of the setup was that Brett would think he was choosing to be away, maintaining his usual pattern of prioritizing business over his relationship with Darla. Actually, Jack continued, cutting into his steak with deliberate precision. I might drive up Saturday afternoon. I've been thinking about asking your father's advice on some land investments. Darla's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Land investments? Some of my consulting clients have been talking about ranch properties as investment opportunities. Howard knows that market better than anyone. It was a lie wrapped in enough truth to be believable. Darla accepted it with the kind of relief that confirmed she'd been planning to use the weekend for her own purposes. Jack waited until Thursday night to make his next move. Darla was already asleep when he slipped out to his workshop and placed a call to Earl Russell, the county sheriff for the area around Howard's ranch. Earl was a practical man who'd served as sheriff for 15 years. He'd worked with Jack on a few cases where Jack's security consulting had intersected with local law enforcement, and he developed a healthy respect for Jack's abilities. Jack. Earl's voice carried the weariness of a man who'd seen too much over the years. What can I do for you? I need to report a potential kidnapping situation, Jack said. It might happen this weekend at the Carpenter Ranch. The conversation that followed was carefully choreographed. Jack explained that he'd received intelligence suggesting that someone might attempt to harm his daughter during the weekend visit. He provided enough detail to sound credible without revealing his sources or methods. Most importantly, he established the legal framework for what would happen next. You want me to put extra patrols in the area? Earl asked. No, too obvious. But I want you to be ready to respond quickly if something goes wrong. And Earl, if my daughter is threatened, I'm going to protect her by any means necessary. Earl understood the subtext. You do what you have to do, Jack. I'll make sure the paperwork reflects the right sequence of events. Friday morning, Jack watched Darla pack Emma's things with the kind of nervous energy that suggested she was planning more than a simple family visit. Emma was excited about seeing her grandfather and spending time exploring the ranch, chattering about the horses and the old barn and the creek that ran through the property. Be good for your mother and grandpa, Jack told Emma as he hugged her goodbye. And remember what I taught you about staying safe. It was their code. Jack had trained Emma in basic safety protocols. Not because he was paranoid, but because his work had taught him that preparation was the difference between survival and catastrophe. Emma knew how to find hiding places, how to stay quiet when told, and most importantly, how to signal for help if needed. I will, Daddy, Emma whispered into his ear. I love you. I love you too, sweetheart, more than all the stars in the sky. After they left, Jack spent Friday completing his final preparations. He loaded his truck with equipment that officially didn't exist, military-grade surveillance gear, communication devices, and other tools from his consulting work that operated in legal gray areas. He also packed items that were decidedly illegal but necessary for what he planned to do. Saturday morning, Jack received the text he'd been expecting from Brett. Meeting delayed until Monday. Darla says you're coming up to see Howard. Might be a good opportunity to discuss some business. Perfect. Brett was taking the bait, just as Jack had predicted. The man's arrogance wouldn't let him resist the opportunity to manipulate Jack in person. Jack's response was carefully neutral, always interested in good business opportunities. See you there. As Jack drove toward the Carpenter Ranch that afternoon, he reflected on how much had changed since he'd discovered Darla's affair. The initial anger had evolved into something colder and more focused. This wasn't about wounded pride or jealousy anymore. It was about protecting what mattered and destroying those who threatened it. The ranch came into view as the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. Howard's property sprawled across several thousand acres of Texas countryside, with the main house situated on a rise that provided commanding views in all directions. It was beautiful country, the kind of place that had been in families for generations and was worth fighting to protect. Jack could see Emma playing near the old barn, her laughter carrying across the distance. Darla sat on the porch with Howard, apparently engaged in serious conversation. And parked behind the house, barely visible from the main approach, was Brett Wolf's BMW. So Brett had arrived early, abandoning his Dallas business meetings to pursue what he thought was a more lucrative opportunity. The man's predictability would be his downfall. Jack parked his truck and walked toward the house, maintaining the relaxed demeanor of a son-in-law visiting family. But his eyes were cataloging details, the position of vehicles, the location of buildings, the terrain features that would matter in the hours to come. "Jack," Howard called out from the porch. "Good to see you made it safely." As Jack climbed the porch steps, he noticed the tension in Darla's posture. Her smile was forced, and she kept glancing toward the house as if expecting something or someone to emerge. "Where's Emma?" Jack asked. "Playing in the barn," Darla said quickly. "She's fine. Dad's been keeping an eye on her." Actually, Brett Wolf's voice came from the doorway behind them. "I've been entertaining her with stories about real estate development." Fascinating conversation. Brett emerged onto the porch with the kind of confident swagger that had probably served him well in business negotiations. He was a handsome man in his early 40s, well-dressed and articulate, with the kind of charm that could convince people to make decisions against their better judgment. "Brett," Jack extended his hand with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Darla mentioned you might be here. Something about business opportunities?" "Always looking for the next deal," Brett replied, his handshake firm and aggressive. "Your father-in-law has some interesting properties that could be developed." The conversation that followed was a carefully orchestrated dance. Brett positioned himself as the helpful expert, explaining various development opportunities while subtly probing for information about Jack's financial situation and investment interests. Darla played her role as the supportive wife, occasionally adding comments that were clearly designed to reinforce Brett's points. Howard mostly listened, occasionally asking questions that revealed far more about Brett's plans than Brett realized. The old man was a master at appearing simple while extracting complex information. As the afternoon wore on, Jack noticed Brett becoming more aggressive in his sales pitch. The man was clearly working towards some kind of proposal, something he planned to spring on Jack during this visit. The moment came as they sat down for dinner. Emma had been fed earlier and was playing in the living room, within sight but out of earshot. "Jack," Brett said, cutting into his steak with theatrical precision, "I've been thinking about your situation. Successful business, beautiful family, but probably not the kind of liquid assets that would let you take advantage of really significant opportunities." "What kind of opportunities?" Jack asked, though he already knew where this was heading. "Well, Howard's been considering selling some of his marginal properties. With the right partner, someone could acquire significant acreage at below-market prices. But it would require moving quickly, and it would require substantial cash investment." The proposal that followed was elegantly crafted. Brett offered to bring Jack into a partnership that would involve purchasing several of Howard's properties at what appeared to be generous prices. Jack would provide the capital, Brett would handle the development and marketing, and they'd split the profits. What Brett didn't explain was that the properties he wanted to buy were the key parcels in his larger scheme. By acquiring them through Jack, Brett would complete his encirclement of Howard's core holdings while appearing to help rather than threaten the family. "It sounds interesting," Jack said finally, "but I want to walk the properties before making any decisions. See exactly what we're talking about." "Of course," Brett smiled. "We could do that tomorrow morning. Some of the best parcels are in the back sections of the ranch, near the old wells." Howard's expression didn't change, but Jack caught the slight tightening around his eyes. They discussed this moment during their planning sessions. The old wells were in the most remote section of the property, accessible only by ranch roads and surrounded by terrain that would provide perfect concealment for what Jack had planned. "That sounds perfect," Jack agreed. "Should we include Darla and Emma in the tour?" Actually, Darla spoke up quickly. "Emma and I were planning to visit some of Dad's old family sites tomorrow. Places she's never seen." Another lie, smoothly delivered. Jack wondered if Darla had always been this deceptive, or if Brett had taught her these skills. "Well then," Jack said, raising his glass in a toast, "to new partnerships and family traditions." As they drank, Jack caught Howard's eye across the table. The old man nodded almost imperceptibly. Everything was proceeding according to plan. After dinner, as Brett and Darla engaged in what they thought was private conversation on the porch, Jack slipped away to check on Emma. He found his daughter in the living room, playing with a set of toy horses that had belonged to her mother as a child. "Having fun, sweetheart?" Jack asked, sitting beside her on the floor. "Uh-huh. But Daddy, that man Brett asks a lot of questions." "What kind of questions?" "About you. About where you work and what you do. And about Mommy. He wanted to know if Mommy was happy." Jack felt a cold anger settle in his chest. Brett had been interrogating his 8-year-old daughter, probably looking for information he could use in custody proceedings. "What did you tell him?" Jack asked gently. "I told him Mommy smiles more when you're not home," Emma said with the brutal honesty of childhood. "But I like it better when you're home because you read better stories." Jack hugged his daughter closer, inhaling the scent of her shampoo and memorizing the feel of her small body against his chest. In less than 24 hours, everything would change. But Emma would be safe. He makes sure of that. "Emma, remember what we talked about? About the special games we play, the hiding games?" "That's right. Tomorrow, we might play one of those games. If Mommy or Grandpa Howard tell you to do something special, you do exactly what they say, okay? Even if it seems scary." Emma looked up at him with solemn eyes. "Is something bad going to happen?" "Something's going to happen," Jack said carefully. "But I promise you, you're going to be safe. Daddy will make sure of that." Later that night, as the house settled into quiet, Jack made his final preparations. He slipped out to his truck and retrieved the equipment he'd need for tomorrow, concealing it in predetermined locations around the ranch property. Howard had provided detailed maps and access to buildings that would serve as staging areas. Most importantly, the old man had ensured that the ranch's security cameras would malfunction at precisely the right moments, leaving no electronic record of what was about to happen. As Jack returned to the house, he paused on the porch where he'd toasted new partnerships just hours earlier. Through the window, he could see Darla sleeping in the guest room, her phone clutched in her hand, even in sleep. In a few hours, she would wake up believing she was one step closer to her new life with Brett Wolfe. She had no idea that she was about to participate in the destruction of everything she thought she wanted. Jack Hudson had spent years learning that the most effective operations were those where the targets destroyed themselves. Tomorrow, he would give Darla and Brett exactly what they deserved and exactly what they'd asked for. The well was waiting. Chapter 4. The Deception. Sunday morning dawned clear and cold, with the kind of crisp air that made the Texas sky seem impossibly wide. Jack woke before sunrise, slipping out of the guest room where he'd slept on the couch to avoid sharing a bed with Darla. He found Howard already in the kitchen, coffee brewing and the morning news playing quietly on a small television. "Sleep well?" Howard asked, though both men knew sleep had been the last thing on either of their minds. "Well enough." Jack poured himself coffee and moved to the window overlooking the property. "Everything ready. Emma's equipment is in place. Earl Russell's got his people positioned, but out of sight. And our friend Brett woke up about an hour ago, already making phone calls to his partners about the big score he's about to make." Through the intercepted communications, they knew Brett had been boasting to his associates about the Carpenter acquisition. He'd already begun transferring funds for what he believed would be his final payment to secure the key properties. More importantly, he'd started making arrangements to relocate Darla and Emma after Jack was dealt with through legal channels. "Darla?" Jack asked, still sleeping, but she got 3 text messages from Brett between midnight and 6 a.m. Seems like he's eager to move to the next phase of their plan. Jack nodded, checking his watch. 8:15 a.m. According to their choreographed timeline, Brett would suggest the property tour around 9:30, giving Jack just enough time to complete his final preparations. "I need to talk to Emma first," Jack said. He found his daughter in her temporary bedroom, already dressed and brushing her teeth in the adjoining bathroom. She looked small in the oversized guest room, but her eyes were bright and alert. "Morning, Daddy," she said around her toothbrush. "Morning, sweetheart. Remember what we talked about yesterday? About the special games?" Emma nodded solemnly. "The hiding games. That's right. Today, Grandpa Howard might ask you to play one of those games. If he does, you follow his instructions exactly, and you don't come out until either he or I come and get you. Understand? What if Mommy comes to get me?" Jack knelt down to Emma's eye level. "Not today, sweetheart. Today, it's just Grandpa Howard or Daddy. Nobody else. Emma studied his face with the intensity that children reserved for moments when they sensed adult emotions they couldn't quite understand. Are you and Mommy fighting? Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements, Jack said carefully. But no matter what happens, I love you more than anything in the world. And I will always protect you. I know, Daddy. As Jack hugged his daughter, he made a silent promise that whatever else happened today, Emma would emerge from this intact. The innocence in her eyes was the one thing Brett Wolfe and Darla would never be allowed to touch. Breakfast was a study in forced normalcy. Darla had emerged from her room with carefully applied makeup and a cheerfulness that seemed designed to convince herself as much as anyone else. Brett arrived promptly at 9 a.m., bringing fresh coffee and pastries from town, the kind of thoughtful gesture that probably reinforced Darla's belief that he genuinely cared about her. Beautiful morning for a property tour, Brett announced, settling into a chair at the kitchen table with the easy confidence of a man who believed he was about to close the deal of a lifetime. Perfect weather, Jack agreed. I'm looking forward to seeing these parcels you mentioned. The conversation over breakfast was carefully orchestrated, with each participant playing their assigned role. Brett positioned himself as the knowledgeable guide, explaining the various factors that made Howard's back properties so valuable for development. Darla played the supportive wife, asking questions that allowed Brett to elaborate on his expertise. Howard maintained his role as the practical rancher, raising just enough concerns to seem realistic without derailing Brett's enthusiasm. Only Jack knew that every word was being recorded by equipment he'd concealed around the house the night before. The breakfast conversation would serve as crucial evidence for what was to come. Well, Brett said, checking his expensive watch, if we're going to see those properties before it gets too hot, we should probably head out soon. Absolutely. Jack stood and stretched. Darla, you and Emma have plans for this morning? Oh, yes, Darla replied quickly. Dad promised to show Emma some of the old family sites. Places where her great-grandmother used to live, that sort of thing. Another lie, delivered with the kind of casual confidence that confirmed Darla had been planning this deception for weeks. What she didn't know was that Howard had never made any such promise, and the family sites she referenced didn't exist. That sounds educational, Jack said. Emma loves learning about family history. As the men prepared to leave for their property tour, Jack caught Howard's eye one final time. The old man nodded slightly. Everything was in place. Take care of my girls, Jack told Howard, knowing that Darla would interpret the comment as typical husband-father concern. Always do, Howard replied. Brett's BMW was loaded with surveying equipment, maps, and a cooler full of drinks. Props for what he believed would be a productive business meeting in the remote sections of the ranch. As they drove away from the main house, Brett began his sales pitch in earnest. The beauty of these back properties, Brett explained as they bounced along increasingly rough ranch roads, is that they're close enough to town for development, but far enough out to avoid most zoning restrictions. With the right approach, we could be looking at a 20-fold return on investment within 5 years. Jack nodded and asked appropriate questions, playing the role of the interested investor while mentally cataloging every detail of their route. The old wells were located in a section of the property that hadn't been actively used for ranching in decades. The access road was barely maintained, winding through scrub brush and rocky terrain that would make outside observation nearly impossible. There, Brett pointed ahead as they crested a small rise. That's the main parcel I was telling you about. The landscape before them was typical Texas ranch country, rolling hills covered in sparse vegetation, with clusters of weathered buildings marking old homestead sites. But Jack's attention was focused on the structures Brett was indicating. A collection of abandoned buildings surrounding what appeared to be an old wellhead. This is where the original Carpenter homestead was located, Brett continued, parking the BMW near a cluster of buildings that included a barn, a small house, and several outbuildings. Howard's grandfather built the first well here in the 1920s. It's been sealed for decades, but the location has excellent access to the water table. Jack climbed out of the car and surveyed the area with professional interest. The isolation was perfect. They were at least 5 miles from the main house, with no line of sight to any neighboring properties. The abandoned buildings would provide excellent concealment for what he'd planned. Interesting location, Jack said. Tell me about the water rights. For the next hour, Brett led Jack through an elaborate presentation about development opportunities, water access, mineral rights, and zoning possibilities. The man was genuinely knowledgeable about real estate development, which made his criminal activities all the more calculated. As Brett talked, Jack noticed several details that confirmed his intelligence about Brett's operation. Survey markers that shouldn't have been there. Recent tire tracks from multiple vehicles. Evidence that someone had been conducting unauthorized surveys of Howard's property. You've done your homework, Jack observed. Always do, Brett replied with obvious pride. I never go into a deal without knowing every angle. What about the legal angles? Making sure all the transfers are properly documented. That sort of thing? Brett's expression shifted slightly. Well, that's where having the right relationships becomes important. I work with people who understand how to expedite certain processes. It was as close to an admission of corruption as Jack was likely to get. Brett was essentially confessing to bribing officials and falsifying documents, though he was careful not to use those specific terms. I appreciate thoroughness, Jack said. It's important to know exactly who you're dealing with. Absolutely. Speaking of which, Jack, I should probably mention that I've done some research on your background too. Impressive military record. Your consulting business seems to be doing well, but I get the sense that you might be ready for something bigger, something with more potential for real wealth. Jack felt a cold smile touch his lips. Brett was beginning his recruitment pitch, probably the same approach he'd used with Darla. Appeal to their ambitions, make them believe they deserved more, then gradually involve them in increasingly questionable activities. I'm always interested in opportunities, Jack said. What did you have in mind? Well, to be honest, this carpenter deal is just the beginning. I've got projects lined up across 3 states. Military logistics, government consulting, private security contracts. The kind of work that could really benefit from someone with your background and security clearance. Brett was offering Jack a partnership in what amounted to a sophisticated criminal enterprise. The man's arrogance was breathtaking. He was literally trying to recruit Jack into the conspiracy against Jack's own family. That sounds intriguing, Jack said carefully, but I want to understand the full scope of what you're proposing. Of course. That's why I think this property tour is so valuable. It gives us a chance to talk privately away from complications. Complications? Brett's expression became more calculating. Well, to be completely honest, Jack, I think you and I both know that your marriage isn't exactly what it appears to be. Darla's a remarkable woman, but she's not happy. She needs someone who understands her potential, who can give her the kind of life she deserves. The audacity was stunning. Brett was standing in the middle of Howard Carpenter's property, preparing to steal the man's land and seduce his daughter, while trying to convince Jack to join the conspiracy against his own family. What are you suggesting? Jack asked. I'm suggesting that sometimes the best business partnerships involve personal changes too. Darla could be much happier with someone who really appreciates her. Emma could benefit from having a father figure who can provide real opportunities. And you could be free to pursue the kind of career that matches your abilities. Brett was proposing exactly what Jack had expected, a complete restructuring of Jack's life that would leave Brett in control of everything Jack valued. The man probably thought he was being subtle. That's a bold proposal, Jack said. Life is short, Brett replied. Sometimes you have to take bold action to get what you want. Jack checked his watch. 11:45 a.m. According to their timeline, Howard would be initiating Phase 2 right about now. You know what, Brett? You're absolutely right about taking bold action. I'm glad you see it that way. I do. In fact, I think it's time we headed back to the house. I'm ready to move forward with this partnership. Brett's smile was triumphant. Excellent. I think you're going to be very happy with this decision. As they drove back toward the main house, Brett continued his sales pitch, apparently convinced that he'd successfully recruited Jack into his conspiracy. The man's confidence was so complete that he began sharing details about his other operations, his network of corrupt officials, and his plans for expanding into new markets. Jack memorized every word, knowing that Brett was essentially dictating his own confession. They were about halfway back to the main house when Jack's phone rang. Howard's name appeared on the display. "Howard," Jack answered, making sure Brett could hear both sides of the conversation. "Jack, thank God. You need to get back here immediately." "What's wrong?" "It's Emma. Darla and we were showing her the old family sites, and there was an accident. She fell into one of the old wells." Jack felt his blood freeze, even though he knew this was part of their plan. The emotion in Howard's voice sounded completely genuine. She's alive, but she's trapped. The well is deep, and the sides are unstable. We got to seal it to prevent a cave-in, but what? "Jack, if we seal it with her inside." Jack closed his eyes, letting the horror of the situation wash over him. Beside him, Brett had gone pale, apparently shocked by what he was hearing. "We're on our way," Jack said. "Don't do anything until I get there. Hurry, Jack. We don't have much time." Jack ended the call and looked at Brett. "We need to get back to the house. Now." "Jesus, Jack, I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can do?" "Just drive." As Brett accelerated along the ranch roads, Jack allowed himself to show the anguish that any father would feel in this situation. The performance wasn't difficult. Even though he knew Emma was safe, the scenario Howard had described was every parent's nightmare. What Brett didn't know was that phase 2 of their plan was now complete. Howard had just established the timeline and circumstances that would justify everything that was about to happen next. And Jack Hudson was about to show Brett Wolfe exactly what bold action really meant. Chapter 5, The Trap Springs. When Brett's BMW skidded to a stop in front of the main house, Jack was out of the car before the engine died. The scene that greeted him was a masterpiece of controlled chaos, exactly what Howard had promised to create. Darla stood on the front porch, tears streaming down her face, her clothes dirty as if she'd been digging or crawling. She rushed toward Jack the moment she saw him, and for a moment, her distress seemed completely genuine. "Jack, oh God, Jack, it happened so fast," she sobbed into his chest. "We were just exploring the old homestead sites, and Emma wanted to look at the well, and the covering gave way, and she fell in." "Where is she?" Jack's voice carried exactly the right combination of panic and determination. Howard appeared from around the side of the house, his face grim and his hands dirty. In the distance, Jack could hear the sound of heavy equipment, a backhoe that Howard had strategically positioned near the supposed accident site. "She's about 15 feet down," Howard said, conscious and talking, but scared. "The well's old, and the sides are starting to crumble. Every minute we wait increases the chance of a complete collapse." Brett Wolfe stood frozen beside his car, apparently stunned by the catastrophe unfolding around him. "Is there anything I can do? Should I call 911? "Already did," Howard said grimly. "But they're 20 minutes out, and we don't have 20 minutes. The whole structure is unstable." Jack looked around the scene, his trained eye cataloging details that would matter later. Howard's performance was flawless. Every element supported the narrative they'd constructed. The backhoe was positioned as if it had been brought in to attempt a rescue. Darla's distress appeared completely authentic. Even the timing was perfect. "I need to see her," Jack said. "It's dangerous," Howard warned. "The ground around the well mouth is unstable. Too much weight, and the whole thing could collapse." "I don't care. She's my daughter." Howard nodded grimly. "I understand. But Jack, if we're going to seal the well to prevent a cave-in, we need to do it soon. And if we do that..." The implication hung in the air like a death sentence. Jack felt his legs weaken, and he had to grab the porch railing for support. The performance wasn't difficult. Any father facing this scenario would be overwhelmed. "There has to be another way," Jack said. "Maybe," Howard said carefully, "but it would require some difficult decisions." Brett stepped forward, his businessman's instincts apparently overriding his shock. "What kind of decisions?" Howard looked at Brett, as if noticing him for the first time. "This is family business, son. I'm not sure it concerns you." "Brett was with me when you called," Jack explained. "He drove me back." "I see." Howard's expression suggested he saw far more than he was saying. "Well, the situation is this. We could try to excavate around the well, create a secondary access point. But that would require heavy equipment, specialized knowledge, and probably 12 to 18 hours of work. 12 hours. Darla's voice cracked. She can't survive down there for 12 hours. There's another option, Howard continued reluctantly. But it would require trust, and it would require everyone involved to keep certain details private. Jack felt his pulse quicken. This was the moment Howard had been building toward. What option? Brett asked. Howard studied Brett carefully, as if evaluating whether to trust him with sensitive information. There are some military-grade rescue techniques that could work, techniques that Jack learned during his service. But they involve equipment and methods that aren't exactly available through normal channels. Brett's eyes sharpened with interest. What kind of equipment? The kind that doesn't officially exist, Jack said quietly. The kind that requires certain people to look the other way and certain events to be described in ways that protect everyone involved. I don't understand, Darla said, though her expression suggested she was beginning to. What Howard is saying, Jack explained, is that I have access to resources that could save Emma. But using those resources would involve certain legal complications. People would need to agree on what happened here and what didn't happen. Brett's lawyer instincts were clearly engaged. What kind of legal complications? The kind that require mutual trust and mutual benefit, Howard said meaningfully. The kind that create partnerships between people who understand the value of discretion. Jack watched Brett's face as the man processed what was being offered. Brett was being invited into a conspiracy, one that would make him complicit in covering up Jack's use of illegal resources to save his daughter. It was exactly the kind of leverage Brett believed he could use later. If Jack can save Emma, Brett said carefully, then I think we all understand the importance of describing events in a way that protects everyone involved, even if that requires certain creative interpretations of what happened. Howard pressed. Of course. Darla looked between the three men, clearly sensing undercurrents she didn't fully understand. But her maternal instincts overrode her confusion. I don't care what we have to do. Save my daughter. Jack felt a cold satisfaction settle in his chest. Brett had just agreed to participate in a conspiracy to cover up illegal activities. More importantly, he'd done so in front of witnesses and, unknown to him, recording equipment. All right, Jack said, but we need to move fast, and we need to coordinate this carefully. Howard, can you handle the official response? Make sure the emergency crews understand the situation when they arrive. Consider it done. Brett, I need you to help me move some equipment from my truck. And I need your word that what happens here today stays between us. You have it, Brett said immediately. Darla. Jack turned to his wife, allowing his voice to carry both love and desperation. I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Of course, she whispered. Just save her. Over the next hour, Jack orchestrated a performance that would have impressed his old military instructors. Using equipment he'd concealed around the property the night before, he created the appearance of a sophisticated rescue operation. Brett was assigned tasks that kept him busy and visible, establishing his presence at the scene during crucial times. Howard managed the official response, coordinating with sheriff's deputies and emergency personnel in a way that supported their manufacture timeline. Most importantly, he ensured that certain key pieces of evidence were in place when law enforcement arrived. The centerpiece of the operation was the well itself. Howard had prepared it meticulously, creating the appearance of a recent cave-in while ensuring that Emma was never actually in danger. Hidden passages and prepositioned equipment allowed them to create all the sounds and evidence needed to support their story. As the afternoon wore on, Jack played his role flawlessly. He appeared to descend into the well using specialized equipment, maintain communication with Emma throughout the rescue, and finally emerged with his daughter in his arms as emergency crews arrived on scene. Emma's performance was perfect. Howard had coached her well, and she clung to Jack with exactly the right combination of relief and residual fear. To any observer, she was a child who had just survived a terrifying ordeal. "Daddy," she whispered into his ear as cameras flashed and officials took statements. "Was that a good hiding game?" "The best," Jack whispered back. "You did exactly what you were supposed to do." By evening, the immediate crisis was over. Emergency personnel had documented the incident, praised Jack's quick thinking and heroic actions, and departed with statements from all witnesses. The official record would show that Emma Hudson had fallen into an old well, been trapped for several hours, and been successfully rescued by her father using techniques he'd learned during military service. Brett Wolfe had been present throughout the incident and had assisted in the rescue efforts. His statement to authorities corroborated the family's account of events. More importantly, he had willingly participated in what he believed was a cover-up of Jack's use of illegal resources. As the last of the emergency vehicles disappeared down the ranch road, Jack stood on Howard's porch holding Emma and watching Darla fuss over their daughter with what appeared to be genuine maternal concern. "Hell of a day," Brett said, settling into a porch chair with a drink Howard had provided. "But it ended well. That's what matters." "Yes," Jack agreed. "It ended exactly as it should have." Brett raised his glass. "To family, and to partnerships built on trust." Jack clinked his glass against Brett's, maintaining eye contact. "To getting exactly what we deserve." As they drank, Jack reflected on how perfectly the day had unfolded. Brett believed he'd been recruited into Jack's inner circle, had proven his trustworthiness, and had gained leverage over Jack through shared culpability in covering up illegal activities. What Brett didn't know was that he'd actually provided Jack with everything needed to destroy him completely. The man had voluntarily placed himself at the scene of what would officially become a kidnapping, had participated in creating false evidence, and had made statements to law enforcement that were demonstrably false. Most importantly, Brett had revealed the full scope of his corruption, his methods, and his network of accomplices, all while believing he was impressing a potential partner. As the evening settled into comfortable domesticity, Jack began planning the final phase of his operation. Brett Wolfe had played his role perfectly. Soon, it would be time for him to face the consequences of his choices. The well had been sealed, officially and permanently. But Jack Hudson's thirst for retribution was just beginning to be satisfied. Chapter 6: The Unraveling. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, with a kind of overcast sky that seemed to press down on the landscape. Jack woke before dawn in the guest room, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch coming to life. In a few hours, everything would change permanently. During the night, while the house slept, Jack had received confirmation that the final pieces of his plan were in place. Earl Russell had positioned his deputies according to their predetermined arrangement. The federal contacts Jack had cultivated during his consulting work were standing by. Most importantly, the comprehensive surveillance network he'd established was ready to capture everything that was about to unfold. Emma was still sleeping, exhausted from her ordeal the day before but physically unharmed. Jack checked on her one final time, memorizing the peaceful expression on her face. By evening, her life would be completely different, but she would be safe and free from the corruption that had infected the adults around her. Howard was already in the kitchen when Jack came downstairs, coffee brewing and morning news playing quietly. The old man looked tired but determined, ready to see their plan through to its conclusion. "Brett's been making phone calls since 5 a.m., Howard reported quietly. "Sounds like he's coordinating with his people about the land transfers. Apparently, he thinks yesterday's events have sealed your partnership." And Darla? Still sleeping, but her phone's been buzzing with text messages. Someone's anxious to talk to her. Jack nodded. Through the intercepted communications, he knew that Brett's associates were pressuring him to finalize the Carpenter land acquisition quickly. Yesterday's incident had convinced them that Jack was now compromised and vulnerable to manipulation. They had no idea how right they were, just not in the way they expected. At 8 a.m., Brett emerged from his room, dressed for business, and carrying a briefcase full of documents. His demeanor was confident and energetic, the attitude of a man who believed he was about to close the biggest deal of his career. "Morning, Jack," Brett said, helping himself to coffee. "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, about expanding our partnership. I've got some documents I'd like you to review." "Of course," Jack replied. "Though I have to admit, yesterday's events have me rethinking a lot of things." "Understandable." But I think you'll find these opportunities even more compelling now. Sometimes crisis reveals new possibilities. Darla appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in her robe, looking haggard and anxious. Her performance as the concerned mother was beginning to crack, revealing the underlying tension of someone whose plans were not proceeding as expected. "How's Emma this morning?" Brett asked her with what appeared to be genuine concern. "Still sleeping," Darla replied. "The doctor said she might be tired for a few days." Trauma response. It was interesting that Darla was maintaining the fiction even when she didn't need to. Jack wondered if she was beginning to believe her own lies, or if she was simply that committed to her deception. "Well," Brett said, settling at the kitchen table and opening his briefcase, "maybe we can take care of some business while she rests." "Jack, I've prepared contract for the land purchases we discussed, plus some additional opportunities that have come up." For the next hour, Brett walked Jack through an elaborate presentation of documents, maps, and financial projections. The proposed deals were even more complex than Jack had expected. A sophisticated scheme that would transfer control of most of Howard's valuable properties to shell companies controlled by Brett. "As you can see," Brett explained, pointing to various clauses in the contracts, "these agreements are structured to provide maximum tax advantages while ensuring rapid appreciation of asset values. With your investment capital and my development expertise, we could be looking at 8-figure returns within 3 years." Jack studied the documents carefully, noting details that Brett probably thought he wouldn't understand. The contracts were masterpieces of legal deception, appearing to benefit all parties while actually transferring most of the value to Brett's hidden entities. "This is impressive work," Jack said finally. "Very sophisticated. I don't do anything halfway," Brett replied with obvious pride. "I can see that. These shell company structures, the offshore accounts, the regulatory workarounds. This level of complexity requires serious expertise." Brett's smile faltered slightly. "Well, you know how complex real estate law can be." "Oh, I'm not talking about real estate law," Jack said casually. "I'm talking about the other aspects. The bribery infrastructure, the document falsification protocols, the methods for circumventing federal oversight. This is professional-grade criminal enterprise." The silence that followed was deafening. Brett's face went pale, and Darla looked confused and alarmed. Even Howard, who was expecting this moment, seemed taken aback by Jack's directness. "I'm not sure what you're implying," Brett said carefully. "I'm not implying anything," Jack replied. "I'm stating facts. These contracts involve systematic violation of federal anti-corruption statutes, conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, and probably RICO predicates." Brett stood up slowly, his businessman's confidence evaporating. "Jack, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "No, a misunderstanding. I understand exactly what you are and what you've been doing. The question is whether you understand what I am." Jack reached into his jacket and withdrew his phone, pressing a button that activated the recording equipment concealed throughout the house. Instantly, Brett's voice filled the kitchen. Hours of secretly recorded conversations detailing his criminal schemes, his plans to destroy the Carpenter family, and his intention to steal Jack's wife and daughter. "You see, Brett, I've been recording everything since the moment I discovered your affair with my wife. Every meeting, every phone call, every scheme you've hatched. I know about your network of corrupt officials. I know about your previous victims in Arizona and New Mexico. I know about the families you've destroyed and the fortunes you've stolen." Brett's face was now completely white. "You're making a serious mistake, Jack. You don't know who you're dealing with." "Actually, I know exactly who I'm dealing with. You're a predator who's gotten comfortable operating without consequences. But you made one critical error in judgment." "What's that?" "You assumed I was just another suburban husband you could manipulate and destroy. You never bothered to learn who I really am or what I'm really capable of." Jack stood and walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the ranch property where Emma was still sleeping safely in the main house. When he turned back, his expression had changed completely, the mask of suburban normalcy replaced by something far more dangerous. "My name is Jack Hudson. For 12 years, I worked for Joint Special Operations Command, conducting operations that officially never happened in countries that officially don't exist. I've eliminated terrorist networks, disrupted criminal organizations, and destroyed enemies of the United States using methods that would horrify normal people. Brett took a step backward, finally beginning to understand the magnitude of his miscalculation. When I left military service, Jack continued, I established a security consulting business that provides legitimate services to legitimate clients. But I also maintain certain capabilities and certain contacts that prove useful when dealing with threats to my family. Jack, Darla said weakly, what are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that your lover is a professional criminal who's been using you to steal your father's land and destroy our family. I'm talking about the fact that you've been so blinded by your selfish desires that you've helped him plan to take Emma away from me permanently. Darla's face crumpled. That's not. We weren't what? Weren't planning to frame me as an unfit father? Weren't planning to use trumped-up charges to gain custody of Emma? Weren't planning to disappear with her once Brett had finished stealing Howard's properties? Jack pulled out a stack of documents and dropped them on the table. I have recordings of every conversation, copies of every text message, documentation of every lie you've told. I know about the private investigator Brett hired to dig up dirt on me. I know about the false domestic violence allegations you were planning to file. I know about the Swiss bank accounts where Brett has been hiding his stolen assets. Brett was now backing toward the kitchen door, apparently calculating his chances of escape. You can't prove any of this, can I? Jack smiled coldly. Earl Russell should be arriving any minute now with federal warrants for your arrest. FBI, DEA, and IRS investigators have been building cases against your network for months, using information I provided. Your associates in Arizona, New Mexico, and Nevada are being arrested as we speak. As if summoned by Jack's words, the sound of approaching vehicles could be heard outside. Through the kitchen window, they could see Sheriff Earl Russell's car leading a convoy of federal law enforcement vehicles up the ranch road. You see, Brett, yesterday's little drama served multiple purposes. It confirmed your criminal conspiracy with my wife. It established your presence at the scene during specific times. And most importantly, it gave me the opportunity to plant federal tracking devices in your car, in your briefcase, while you were helping with Emma's rescue. Brett's face went through several expressions: shock, rage, calculation, and finally, desperate cunning. You think you're smart, but you've made mistakes too. I have evidence of your illegal activities from yesterday. Military equipment, unauthorized operations. What military equipment? Jack asked mildly. What unauthorized operations? According to every witness, including you, Emma fell into a well, and I rescued her using conventional methods. The official record shows heroic father saving his daughter, with assistance from concerned family friend Brett Wolf. But the equipment? What equipment? Did you see any military equipment? Did you witness any illegal activities? Because if you did, you'll need to explain why you didn't report them to the authorities who interviewed you yesterday. Brett's mouth opened and closed silently as he realized the trap. By participating in what he thought was a cover-up, he made himself complicit in activities he couldn't now expose without admitting his own guilt. The sound of car doors slamming outside was followed by heavy footsteps on the porch. Earl Russell's voice called out, "Jack, you folks decent in there." "Come on in, Earl," Jack called back. "We're all here." Sheriff Russell entered the kitchen followed by 6 federal agents wearing tactical gear and badges identifying them as FBI, DEA, and IRS investigators. The lead agent, a woman in her 40s with the kind of professional demeanor that came from years of complex financial investigations, stepped forward. "Mr. Brett Wolf?" she asked, though it was clearly a formality. "Yes," Brett replied weakly. "Agent Sarah Martinez, FBI Financial Crimes Division. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, racketeering, and corruption of public officials." As Agent Martinez read Brett his rights, Jack watched Darla's world collapse around her. His wife stood frozen in her robe, apparently unable to process the speed with which her carefully planned new life was disintegrating. "Jack," she whispered, "I can't explain." "No need," Jack replied. I understand everything perfectly. Agent Martinez finished with Brett's rights and turned to Darla. Mrs. Hudson, you're also under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and accessory to multiple felonies. Wait, Darla said, panic finally breaking through her shock. I didn't know about any crimes. Brett told me this was legitimate business. Ma'am, you'll have the opportunity to discuss your level of involvement with investigators. But based on recorded communications and documentary evidence, you were an active participant in criminal conspiracy against your own family. As federal agents led Brett and Darla away in handcuffs, Jack felt a profound sense of completion. The people who had betrayed him and threatened his daughter were finally facing consequences proportional to their crimes. Howard clapped Jack on the shoulder. Hell of a thing, watching justice actually work for once. It's not over yet, Jack replied. Brett's criminal network extends across multiple states. His arrest will trigger investigations that'll take years to complete. And Darla, she'll have to live with the knowledge that her selfish choices destroyed not just our family, but her own freedom. What about Emma? Jack looked out the window toward the main house where his daughter was still sleeping, protected from the chaos that had consumed the adults around her. Emma gets a new life, free from people who would use her as a weapon or a bargaining chip. Free from the corruption that's been poisoning this family. As the last of the law enforcement vehicles disappeared down the ranch road, Jack began planning the next phase of his life. His marriage was over. His wife was facing federal charges. His daughter's mother would likely spend years in prison. But Emma would be safe. Emma would be loved. And Emma would grow up knowing that some people in the world were willing to fight for what mattered, no matter the cost. Jack Hudson had learned long ago that some enemies could only be defeated through complete and total destruction. Today, he'd applied that lesson to protect the most important person in his world. The well had been sealed. The betrayers had been eliminated. And justice, in its most brutal and unforgiving form, had finally been served. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. 6 weeks after Brett Wolfe and Darla Hudson were arrested at Howard Carpenter's ranch, Jack sat in his lawyer's office reviewing the final divorce papers. The legal proceedings had moved with unusual speed, thanks largely to the overwhelming evidence of Darla's criminal conspiracy and adultery. She's agreed to relinquish all parental rights. Jack's attorney, William Gillespie, explained as he slid the documents across the mahogany table. In exchange, the prosecution is recommending a reduced sentence on the conspiracy charges. Jack studied the papers that would legally sever Darla's connection to Emma forever. It was a stark conclusion to 12 years of marriage, but Jack felt only relief. Emma would never again be threatened by a mother who'd been willing to use her as leverage in criminal schemes. What's her current status? Jack asked. Federal holding facility in Houston. Bail was denied after she was classified as a flight risk. Her defense attorney is pushing for a plea agreement, but the prosecution isn't feeling generous. Brett Wolfe has been cooperating fully, which means they have detailed information about her level of involvement. Jack wasn't surprised. Brett had proven himself to be exactly the kind of coward who would sell out his accomplices to save himself. The man who'd swagger and manipulated his way through life was now desperately trying to minimize his own prison sentence by betraying everyone he'd worked with. How much time is she looking at? Realistically, 8 to 12 years if she takes a plea. 15 to 20 if she goes to trial and loses. The evidence against her is substantial. Jack signed the divorce papers with steady hands. 12 years of marriage ended with the stroke of a pen and the weight of criminal betrayal. Emma would be 8 years old when her mother was sentenced, possibly 20 when Darla was released from prison. But Emma would be safe. That was all that mattered. There's one other matter, Gillespie continued. The federal investigation into Brett's network has uncovered something interesting. It seems your wife and her lover weren't the only ones involved in this conspiracy. Jack looked up from the papers. What do you mean? Howard Carpenter's been receiving some unusual visitors at the ranch. Federal agents, specifically. Seems like Brett's operation was larger than anyone initially realized. That afternoon, Jack drove out to Howard's ranch to check on Emma and discuss the latest developments in the federal investigation. His daughter had been staying with her grandfather while Jack dealt with the legal complications of the arrests and divorce proceedings. He found Emma in her favorite spot by the old barn, playing with a set of toy horses while Howard watched from the porch. She'd adjusted to her mother's absence with the resilience of childhood, though Jack knew she would eventually need help processing the complex emotions surrounding Darla's betrayal and imprisonment. "Daddy!" Emma ran to him as he climbed out of his truck. "Grandpa, Howard's been teaching me about taking care of horses." "That's wonderful, sweetheart." Jack hugged his daughter, feeling the familiar surge of protective love that had driven all his recent actions. "Are you having a good time here?" "Uh-huh. But I miss you." "I miss you too. That's why I came to talk to Grandpa about something important." Howard joined them as they walked toward the house. The old man looked tired but satisfied, like someone who'd finally seen justice served after years of frustration. "Federal boys been by again today," Howard said quietly. "Seems like Brett's been talking a blue streak about his operation. Some interesting details coming to light." Inside the house, Howard poured coffee while Emma played in the living room, within sight but out of earshot. Jack could see that his daughter was content and secure. Howard had been good for her during this difficult transition. "What kind of details?" Jack asked. "Turns out Brett's land acquisition scheme was bigger than we thought. He wasn't just targeting my properties. He was part of a network that's been systematically stealing ranch land across the Southwest. Mineral rights, water rights, oil leases, millions of dollars in assets." Jack wasn't entirely surprised. His surveillance of Brett had suggested the man's operation was sophisticated and far-reaching. But the scope was larger than he'd initially understood. How many families were involved? Dozens, maybe hundreds. Brett and his associates would identify properties with valuable resources, then use various methods to force owners into desperate financial situations. Sometimes it was legal manipulation, sometimes intimidation, sometimes outright fraud. And law enforcement never caught on? Howard's expression darkened. "That's where it gets interesting." Turns out Brett had sources inside various agencies. Sheriff's departments, county assessors' offices, state regulatory agencies. He was getting advanced information about mineral surveys, environmental assessments, zoning changes, intelligence that let him target specific properties months or years before owners knew their land was valuable. Jack felt a cold certainty settle in his chest. Corrupt officials. More than that. According to what the federal boys are telling me, Brett's network included judges, prosecutors, and regulatory officials across 3 states. When legal manipulation didn't work, they'd simply buy the decisions they needed. The implications were staggering. Brett Wolfe hadn't just been a criminal. He'd been part of a systematic conspiracy that corrupted the legal system itself. Families who tried to fight back through proper channels had found themselves facing judges who'd already been bought, prosecutors who wouldn't file charges, and regulatory agencies that rubber-stamped whatever Brett wanted. "What does that leave us?" Jack asked. "Clean. The federal investigation confirms that Brett targeted my family specifically because he thought we were vulnerable. He never expected to run into someone with your background." Jack nodded. His military experience and security consulting contacts had given him resources that Brett's typical victims didn't possess. Most ranch families facing this kind of predatory behavior had no choice but to accept their losses or fight through a legal system that had been systematically corrupted. What about the other families? The ones who lost their properties? "That's the beautiful part," Howard smiled grimly. "Federal prosecutors are using RICO statutes to unwind fraudulent transfers going back 7 years. Families who lost their land are getting it back. Shell companies that bought properties through fraud are being dissolved. And the corrupt officials who enabled Brett's operation are facing their own criminal charges." Jack felt a deep satisfaction at the news. His personal revenge against Brett and Darla had triggered a much larger reckoning that would help dozens of innocent families recover what had been stolen from them. "There's something else," Howard continued. "The federal agents asked me about your role in the investigation. Specifically, they wanted to know if you consider consulting on similar cases." "What kind of consulting?" "Seems like Brett's operation wasn't unique. There are similar networks operating in other regions, using the same methods to steal family properties. The FBI is building a specialized task force to investigate these crimes, and they need people with your skill set. Jack considered the offer. His security consulting business was successful, but it mostly involved protecting wealthy clients from conventional threats. The opportunity to use his abilities to help families fight back against sophisticated predators had a different kind of appeal. What would that involve? Undercover operations, surveillance, financial investigation, essentially what you did to Brett, but with official sanction and federal resources. You'd be helping families who can't protect themselves against organized criminal networks. It was tempting. Jack had discovered that he was exceptionally good at dismantling complex criminal operations, and the work would provide meaning beyond simple profit. But he also had to consider Emma's needs. "I need to be careful about travel and time commitments," Jack said. "Emma's my priority." "Understood. But Jack, think about what you accomplished here. You saved not just your own family, but dozens of others. That's rare in this world." That evening, as Jack tucked Emma into her temporary bed at Howard's ranch house, his daughter asked the question he'd been dreading. "Daddy, is Mommy ever coming home?" Jack sat on the edge of her bed, choosing his words carefully. "No, sweetheart. Mommy made some bad choices, and now she has to face the consequences of those choices. Did she stop loving us? I think your mother forgot what love really means. Real love means protecting the people you care about, even when it's hard. It means telling the truth, even when lies seem easier. Your mother forgot those things." Emma was quiet for a long moment. "Do you still love her?" "I'll always care about her, because she's your mother," Jack said carefully. "But I can't trust her anymore. And without trust, love can't survive. Will I see her again? Maybe someday, when you're older. But right now, my job is to keep you safe and help you grow up to be the kind of person who makes good choices." Emma nodded solemnly. "Like you did when you saved me from the well. Like I do every day when I choose to put you first." As Emma drifted off to sleep, Jack reflected on the path that had led them to this point. 6 months ago, he'd been living what most people would consider a normal life: successful career, suburban home, seemingly stable marriage. The discovery of Darla's betrayal had shattered that illusion, but it had also revealed truths about love, loyalty, and justice that were far more valuable. Brett Wolfe was facing life in prison. Darla would spend the best years of her life paying for her crimes. Dozens of corrupt officials were being prosecuted. Innocent families were recovering stolen property. And Emma was safe. Jack Hudson had learned long ago that some battles could only be won through total victory. When enemies threatened what you valued most, half measures and compromise led to defeat. You had to be willing to destroy them completely, no matter the cost. Tonight, as he listened to his daughter's peaceful breathing, Jack knew he'd made the right choice. The people who'd betrayed his family were facing justice. The criminal network that had threatened so many others was being dismantled. Most importantly, Emma would grow up knowing that some people in the world were willing to fight for what mattered, whatever the cost. The well had been sealed. The betrayers had been destroyed. And Jack Hudson had finally found the peace that came from total victory over those who'd threatened his family. Chapter 8: Federal Partnership. 3 months later, Jack stood in a federal office building in Houston, reviewing surveillance footage with Agent Sarah Martinez and her team. The images showed a sophisticated money laundering operation centered around a luxury car dealership in Phoenix. The latest target in what had become Operation Stronghold, the federal task force dedicated to dismantling criminal networks that preyed on family-owned properties. The pattern's identical to Brett Wolfe's operation, Agent Martinez explained, pointing to financial records displayed on multiple monitors. Shell companies, corrupt officials, systematic targeting of families with valuable land holdings. But this network is larger and more sophisticated. Jack studied the evidence with professional interest. In the 3 months since joining the federal task force as a special consultant, he'd helped identify and dismantle criminal operations in 4 states. The work combined his military expertise with his business knowledge in ways that proved devastatingly effective against organized crime. Timeline for moving against them? Jack asked. 2 weeks. We need someone to get close to the leadership, confirm their methods, and document their network of corrupt officials. Someone with your background. Deep cover. Extensive. You'd be posing as a potential investor, someone with military connections and access to capital. The kind of person they recruit as a front for their operations. Jack nodded. It was similar to the approach he'd used against Brett, but with federal resources and legal authority backing his actions. The combination of official sanction and his unconventional methods had proven remarkably effective. What about Emma? She'll stay with Howard during the operation. The man's become quite attached to his granddaughter. That was true. Howard Carpenter had embraced his role as Emma's primary caregiver with enthusiasm that surprised everyone. The old rancher who'd seemed so set in his ways had adapted to 8-year-old energy and curiosity with remarkable grace. More importantly, Emma was thriving under Howard's care. The trauma of losing her mother to federal prison had been offset by the stability and genuine affection Howard provided. She was doing well in the local school, had made friends among the ranch families in the area, and showed no signs of the emotional damage Jack had feared. How long would the operation take? 4 to 6 weeks. Long enough to document their full network and gather evidence for RICO prosecutions. Jack considered the assignment. The Phoenix operation represented everything he'd come to hate about predatory criminals, sophisticated, well-connected, and ruthless in their exploitation of innocent families. Taking them down would help dozens of victims and prevent hundreds more. "I'm in," Jack said, "but I want full tactical support and real-time monitoring. These networks have a tendency to turn violent when cornered. You'll have whatever you need." 2 weeks later, Jack Hudson became Jake Holloway, a former military contractor with connections to private security firms and access to significant capital from undisclosed clients. His cover identity was meticulously crafted, supported by federal resources, and designed to appeal to exactly the kind of criminal network he was targeting. The Phoenix operation was based around Rodriguez Luxury Motors, a high-end car dealership that served as a front for money laundering and asset transfer schemes. The dealership's owner, Ramon Shelton, was a sophisticated criminal who'd spent years building relationships with corrupt officials and wealthy clients who needed certain financial services. Jack's first meeting with Shelton took place in the dealership's VIP showroom, surrounded by exotic cars worth millions of dollars. Shelton was a charming man in his 50s, with the kind of polished confidence that came from years of successful criminal enterprise. "Mr. Holloway," Shelton said, gesturing toward a pristine Ferrari, "I understand you're interested in investment opportunities that provide both profit and discretion. I represent clients who value privacy," Jack replied, maintaining the careful balance of interest and caution that characterized his cover identity. Military contractors, security firms, people who operate in gray areas and need financial services that understand their unique requirements. Exactly the kind of clients we serve. Our business model focuses on helping successful people protect and grow their assets without unnecessary government oversight. Over the following weeks, Jack was gradually introduced to the full scope of Shelton's operation. The man's network included corrupt judges, prosecutors, sheriff's deputies, and regulatory officials across Arizona and New Mexico. They perfected a system of identifying valuable properties, manufacturing legal problems for current owners, and acquiring assets at fraction of their true worth. But Shelton's operation was more sophisticated than Brett Wolf's had been. Rather than simply stealing properties, they developed methods for legitimizing their acquisitions through complex legal manipulations that were nearly impossible to challenge through normal channels. "The beauty of our approach," Shelton explained during one of their private meetings, "is that everything appears completely legal. Property owners face legitimate financial pressure, make voluntary decisions to sell, and transfer assets through proper legal channels. By the time they realize they've been manipulated, the transactions are legally unassailable." Jack recorded every conversation, documented every criminal admission, and identified every corrupt official in Shelton's network. The evidence he gathered revealed a conspiracy that extended far beyond simple fraud. This was systematic corruption of the legal system itself. The operation reached its climax when Shelton invited Jack to participate in their next acquisition, a ranch family in New Mexico who were being pressured to sell valuable water rights for a fraction of their worth. Shelton wanted Jack to provide the capital for the purchase, while local officials manufactured legal problems that would force the family into desperation. This is exactly the kind of opportunity that generates substantial returns, Shelton said, reviewing documents in his private office. The family thinks they're selling water rights worth maybe $50,000. They have no idea those rights are worth $20 million to the mining companies we represent. What about the legal challenges? Jack asked. Already arranged. The county assessor will discover tax irregularities that require immediate payment. The environmental agency will find violations that require expensive remediation. The bank will call in loans based on fraudulent asset evaluations. Within 60 days, the family will be facing financial ruin and legal prosecution unless they sell. And if they refuse, Shelton's expression hardened. Let's just say that sometimes accidents happen. Equipment failures, fires, personal tragedies that convince people to reconsider their options. It was a directed mission of extortion and implied threat of violence. Jack had everything he needed to bring down Shelton's entire network. The federal operation moved swiftly. At 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, teams of FBI, DEA, and IRS agents simultaneously raided locations across Arizona and New Mexico. Shelton was arrested at his dealership, surrounded by the luxury cars that had served as symbols of his criminal success. 18 corrupt officials were arrested, including 2 judges, a prosecutor, 3 sheriff's deputies, and various regulatory officials. The network's financial assets were frozen, and their victims were notified that fraudulent property transfers would be reversed. Jack watched the arrest from the Federal Task Force Command Center, feeling the familiar satisfaction that came from seeing justice served against those who preyed on innocent families. "Hell of a job," Agent Martinez said, reviewing the evidence Jack had gathered. "This investigation will generate prosecutions for years, and the civil asset forfeiture will recover millions of dollars for victims." What about the New Mexico family? The one Shelton was targeting? Safe. We intervened before any legal action was taken against them. They'll keep their water rights and receive compensation for the stress they endured. Jack nodded. Another family protected, another criminal network destroyed. It was becoming a pattern he found deeply satisfying. That evening, Jack called Howard's ranch to check on Emma. His daughter's voice was bright and excited as she told him about her day at school, her riding lessons, and the new calf that had been born on the ranch. "When are you coming home, Daddy?" Emma asked. "Soon, sweetheart. Just finishing up some work that helps protect families like ours. Like what you did to that bad man, Brett. Something like that. Making sure people who hurt others face consequences for their actions." "Good. I love you, Daddy." "I love you too, Emma. More than all the stars in the sky." As Jack ended the call, he reflected on how much his life had changed since discovering Darla's betrayal. The personal devastation that had destroyed his marriage had led to a career that provided both purpose and satisfaction. He was using his abilities to protect innocent families from exactly the kind of predators who'd threatened his own. Emma was safe, loved, and growing up with values that would help her make good choices throughout her life. Darla was serving her sentence in federal prison, facing the consequences of her betrayal and criminal conspiracy. Brett Wolfe would likely die in prison, his network of corruption finally exposed and dismantled. And Jack Hudson had found his calling, using the darkest skills from his military past to protect the innocent and destroy those who threatened them. The war against organized crime was far from over. There were other networks, other predators, other families who needed protection. But Jack had learned something important during his personal battle with Brett and Darla. Sometimes the only way to achieve real justice was through total victory. He would continue fighting. For Emma, for the families who couldn't protect themselves, and for the principle that betrayal and corruption should face swift and devastating consequences. The well had been sealed. The betrayers had been destroyed. And Jack Hudson had finally found peace in the knowledge that justice, in its most unforgiving form, would always prevail. Chapter 9. The Final Justice. 1 year after Brett Wolfe's arrest, Jack Hudson stood in the visiting room of the Federal Correctional Institution in Beaumont, Texas, waiting for his final meeting with the man who had tried to destroy his family. The request for this meeting had come from Brett himself, channeled through his attorney and approved by federal authorities. Jack wasn't sure why he'd agreed to come. Brett had nothing left to offer. His cooperation with prosecutors had already provided everything useful for ongoing investigations. His network had been dismantled, his assets seized, his corrupt officials prosecuted. But something about the request suggested Brett had finally begun to understand the magnitude of his miscalculations. Brett entered the visiting room flanked by guards, his expensive suits replaced by standard prison orange. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by the hollow-eyed demeanor of a man who'd lost everything and faced decades of confinement. At 44, Brett Wolfe looked 20 years older. "Jack," Brett said as he sat across the metal table. "Thank you for coming." Jack studied the broken man before him. "What do you want, Brett?" "I want to understand how you did it. How you played us so completely that we never saw it coming. You want tactical analysis from the man who destroyed you. I want to understand why I lost everything while you gained everything." Jack leaned back in his chair, considering the question. "You lost because you fundamentally misunderstood what you were dealing with. You saw a suburban husband and thought you could manipulate him like your other victims. You never bothered to learn who I really was or what I was really capable of. But it was more than that. You didn't just defend yourself. You orchestrated our complete destruction. Darla, me, our entire network." "How?" "Because you threatened my daughter," Jack said quietly. "The moment you started planning to take Emma away from me, you crossed a line that guaranteed your destruction." Brett's expression showed the first spark of understanding. It was never about Darla. It was never about the affairs or the business schemes. It was only about Emma. Everything was about Emma. Darla was your accomplice. She deserved to face consequences for her betrayal. But you made the mistake of involving my child in your schemes. That made your destruction inevitable. I never meant to hurt Emma. Yes, you did. Your plan required taking her away from me permanently. You were willing to use custody manipulation, false allegations, and legal corruption to steal my daughter and give her to her criminal mother. That wasn't collateral damage. That was deliberate. Brett was quiet for several minutes, apparently processing the implications of Jack's words. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a hollow understanding. "You planned everything from the beginning. The surveillance, the recordings, the fake well incident, the federal investigation, all of it was designed to destroy us completely. The federal investigation was real. Your criminal network was real. The evidence against you was real. I simply provided the authorities with information they needed to protect innocent families. But you could have just exposed the affair. You could have divorced Darla and moved on. Why did you need to destroy our lives so completely?" Jack's expression hardened. "Because partial victory isn't victory. Because leaving enemies alive gives them the opportunity to return and threaten you again. Because people who are willing to use children as weapons don't deserve mercy or second chances. You destroyed dozens of people. My entire network, all the officials we worked with, everyone connected to our operation. I destroyed criminals who were stealing from innocent families and corrupting the legal system. The collateral damage was people who chose to participate in organized crime. They made their choices. They faced the consequences." Brett shook his head slowly. "You're more ruthless than anyone I ever dealt with, including some very dangerous people. I'm a father protecting his daughter. That makes me more dangerous than any criminal you've encountered." The conversation continued for another hour, with Brett asking questions about tactics and Jack providing carefully measured answers. It was like a debriefing between former enemies, with Brett trying to understand how he'd been so completely outmaneuvered. "What happens to Emma now?" Brett asked finally. "Emma grows up safe, loved, and free from people who would use her as leverage or a weapon. She's living with her grandfather on the ranch, doing well in school, and learning that some people in the world are willing to fight for what matters. And you, I continue working with federal authorities to dismantle criminal networks like yours. I use my abilities to protect families who can't protect themselves from organized predators." Brett nodded slowly. "You found purpose in destroying us. I found purpose in protecting the innocent and eliminating threats to my family. Your destruction was simply the most effective method for achieving those goals. As the meeting ended and Brett was led back to his cell, Jack reflected on the conversation. The man who'd once been so confident and manipulative was now broken and hopeless, facing 30 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. Darla was serving 12 years in a different facility, her parental rights permanently terminated and her future destroyed by her own criminal choices. She would be nearly 50 when released, with no family, no prospects, and a criminal record that would follow her forever. But Emma was thriving. At 9 years old, she was a confident, happy child who loved her life on Howard's ranch. She was academically gifted, socially well-adjusted, and showed no signs of the trauma that might have resulted from her mother's betrayal and abandonment. More importantly, Emma was learning values that would guide her throughout life. She understood the importance of loyalty, honesty, and protecting those you love. She was growing up with the knowledge that some people were willing to fight for what mattered, whatever the cost. That evening, Jack called Howard's ranch to check on Emma before she went to bed. "Daddy," Emma's voice was bright with excitement. "Guess what happened today?" "What, sweetheart?" "We found baby birds in the barn. Howard says we can watch them grow up and learn to fly." "That sounds wonderful. Are you taking good care of them?" "Uh-huh. Howard says we have to be very gentle and let their mama take care of them. But we can watch from far away." "That's exactly right. Sometimes the best way to help someone is to protect them from a distance. Like you do with your work." Jack smiled. "Something like that. Are you happy, Emma?" "Very happy. I love living on the ranch. I love Howard. And I love you most of all. I love you too, sweetheart. More than all the stars in the sky." After ending the call, Jack drove to his new home, a secure property outside Houston that served as his base of operations for federal task force work. The house was modest but well-equipped, with security systems and communication equipment that allowed him to work effectively with law enforcement agencies across the region. On his desk were files for 3 new investigations: criminal networks in Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Louisiana that were using methods similar to Brett Wolf's operation. Families were being targeted, properties were being stolen, and corrupt officials were enabling systematic theft of generational wealth. Jack would dismantle these networks just as he destroyed Brett's operation. He would protect the innocent, eliminate the threats, and ensure that criminals who preyed on families faced swift and devastating consequences. The work provided purpose beyond personal satisfaction. Every criminal network destroyed meant dozens of families protected. Every corrupt official prosecuted meant a more honest legal system. Every predator eliminated meant safer communities. But the deepest satisfaction came from knowing that Emma was safe. His daughter would grow up in a world where she was loved, protected, and valued for who she was rather than what she could provide to others. She would never be used as leverage or threatened by people who prioritize their own selfish desires over a child's well-being. Jack Hudson had learned during his military service that some battles could only be won through total victory. When enemies threatened what you valued most, compromise led to defeat. You had to be willing to destroy them completely, whatever the cost. The battle for his family had been won decisively. Brett Wolf was broken and imprisoned. Darla faced years of incarceration for her betrayal. Their criminal network had been dismantled. The corrupt officials who'd enabled their crimes were facing prosecution. Most importantly, Emma was safe, happy, and growing up with people who truly loved her. As Jack reviewed the files for his next operations, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. The discovery of Darla's affair had been devastating, but it had also revealed truths about love, loyalty, and justice that were far more valuable than the illusion of domestic tranquility. Real love meant protecting those you cared about, even when it required difficult choices. Real loyalty meant standing by your principles when others abandoned theirs. Real justice meant ensuring that people who hurt the innocent faced consequences proportional to their crimes. The well had been sealed. The betrayers had been destroyed. The innocent had been protected. And Jack Hudson had finally found the peace that came from knowing he'd fought for what mattered most and won. Emma was safe. That was all that had ever mattered. That was all that would ever matter. Justice had been served. And there you have it. another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Architect's Foundation. Ryan Morrison had always been a builder, not of structures, but of systems, relationships, and opportunities. At 32, he possessed a rare combination of analytical brilliance and street-smart intuition that most MBA graduates could only dream of acquiring. His background wasn't silver-spooned. He'd clawed his way up from a middle-class family in Ohio, working construction summers to pay for business school, learning that real success came from understanding both the boardroom and the trenches. When he first met Diana Hartwell at a charity gala in Manhattan, he wasn't immediately swept away by her beauty, though she was undeniably stunning with her auburn hair and emerald eyes. What caught his attention was her intelligence and her family's business empire. Hartwell Industries had been built by her grandfather in the 1960s, manufacturing specialized industrial equipment. By the time Diana's father, Gregory, took over, it was a solid but stagnating $50 million company, comfortable but lacking vision. Diana herself was a contradiction, sophisticated yet surprisingly naive about the business world her family dominated. She worked in the company's marketing department, more as a formality than necessity, spending her days organizing corporate events and managing social media presence. Their courtship was passionate but strategic on Ryan's part. He genuinely cared for Diana, but he also saw the potential in Hartwell Industries that Gregory couldn't see. The wedding was a grand affair, featured in the society pages, with Gregory proudly walking his only daughter down the aisle. In his speech, he welcomed Ryan not just as a son-in-law, but as fresh blood for the family business. Ryan smiled graciously, already formulating plans that would transform Hartwell Industries into something far beyond Gregory's limited imagination. Ryan's integration into the company began slowly. Gregory gave him a mid-level position in business development, expecting him to learn the ropes gradually. But Ryan had no intention of playing the patient apprentice. Within his first month, he'd identified 7 major inefficiencies in their supply chain, 3 untapped market segments, and a dozen potential strategic partnerships that could exponentially increase revenue. His first major move was brilliant in its simplicity. While Gregory focused on their traditional industrial clients, Ryan quietly began cultivating relationships with tech companies expanding their manufacturing capabilities. He understood that the future lay in automation and precision manufacturing, areas where Hartwell's equipment could excel with the right modifications and marketing approach. Diana watched her husband's integration with a mixture of admiration and unease. She'd grown up seeing her father as the ultimate authority in business matters, but Ryan operated on a different level entirely. He worked 16-hour days, not out of desperation, but from genuine excitement about the possibilities he saw everywhere. The transformation began in earnest during Ryan's second year. He convinced Gregory to let him lead a new initiative targeting renewable energy companies. The investment was substantial, nearly $8 million in retooling and research, but Ryan had done his homework. He'd spent months building relationships with key decision-makers in wind and solar industries, understanding their specific needs and pain points. Within 18 months, the renewable energy division was generating $30 million annually. Gregory was thrilled, but also somewhat bewildered by the speed of the success. He'd run the company for 20 years, achieving steady but modest growth. Ryan had revolutionized their entire market position in less than 2 years. But Ryan was just getting started. He began implementing a systematic approach to business development that Gregory couldn't fully comprehend. Every client relationship, every supplier agreement, every strategic partnership was carefully structured to create long-term dependencies that benefited Hartwell Industries. More importantly, Ryan ensured that many of these crucial relationships were built on personal trust with him specifically. As the company's revenue soared toward the $100 million mark, Ryan's position became increasingly central to operations. He created a network of influence that extended far beyond the company's traditional boundaries, building alliances with suppliers, clients, and industry leaders who viewed him as the driving force behind Hartwell's success. Diana, meanwhile, began to feel overshadowed by her husband's growing prominence. The company that had been her family's legacy was becoming Ryan's domain, and she found herself increasingly irrelevant to its operations. This growing resentment would prove to be the first crack in their marriage's foundation. Chapter 2. Empire Building. By the third year of Ryan's tenure, Hartwell Industries had become unrecognizable from the modest company Gregory had inherited. Revenue had tripled to $150 million, but more importantly, Ryan had fundamentally altered the company's position in the industrial ecosystem. He'd moved them from being a traditional equipment manufacturer to becoming an indispensable partner in their clients' operational success. Ryan's strategy was methodical and brilliant. He'd identified that their clients' biggest challenge wasn't just equipment quality. It was integration, maintenance, and optimization. So he created comprehensive service packages that made Hartwell Industries essential to their clients' daily operations. More critically, these services were structured so that Ryan personally maintained the key relationships with major accounts. The Meridian Corporation deal exemplified Ryan's approach. Meridian was a massive aerospace contractor looking to modernize their manufacturing capabilities. Instead of simply selling them equipment, Ryan proposed a complete operational partnership. Hartwell would provide customized machinery, ongoing technical support, real-time optimization consulting, and guaranteed replacement parts for 10 years. The contract was worth $40 million over 5 years, but more importantly, it made Meridian utterly dependent on Hartwell services. Ryan repeated this strategy across dozens of major accounts. Pinnacle Manufacturing, Atlas Industries, Cornerstone Systems, each became not just clients, but dependent partners whose operations would suffer significant disruption if Hartwell's services were interrupted. He carefully structured these relationships so that while the contracts were legally with Hartwell Industries, the personal relationships and operational knowledge resided with him. Gregory watched this transformation with growing ambivalence. He was thrilled by the financial success, but increasingly uncomfortable with his diminishing relevance. The company's board meetings had become forums where Ryan presented strategies that Gregory could barely follow, let alone contribute to meaningfully. Clients who once called Gregory directly now went straight to Ryan for any significant decisions. This shift in power dynamics created tension in unexpected places. Diana found herself caught between loyalty to her father and admiration for her husband's capabilities. She watched Gregory struggle to maintain authority in his own company, while Ryan effortlessly commanded respect from employees, clients, and industry partners alike. The situation became more complex when Ryan began expanding internationally. He'd identified opportunities in Southeast Asian markets that could potentially double their revenue within 3 years. But this expansion required significant capital investment and operational changes that made Gregory deeply uncomfortable. "We've always been a domestic company," Gregory argued during one heated board meeting. "This international expansion is too risky, too fast." Ryan calmly presented market analysis, financial projections, and preliminary agreements with potential partners in Malaysia and Vietnam. The numbers were compelling, but Gregory's resistance wasn't really about risk assessment. It was about control. He could sense that this expansion would solidify Ryan's position as the company's true leader while relegating Gregory to a ceremonial role. Despite Gregory's reservations, the board approved Ryan's international expansion plan. Within 18 months, Hartwell's Southeast Asian operations were generating $80 million annually. The company's total revenue had reached $280 million, making it a major player in their industry. But success came with unexpected consequences. Diana, who had initially been proud of Ryan's achievements, began feeling increasingly isolated and resentful. She'd grown up as Gregory Hartwell's daughter, inheriting status and importance from that identity. Now she was merely Ryan Morrison's wife, peripheral to the business empire that bore her family name but operated according to her husband's vision. Her resentment deepened when she realized how completely Ryan had transformed not just the company's operations, but its culture. Employees who had worked for her father for decades now looked to Ryan for leadership and direction. The office Christmas party conversations revolve around Ryan's latest strategic initiatives rather than the company's traditional values and practices. Trevor Sullivan entered this volatile situation as the new director of human resources, hired by Ryan to manage the company's rapid expansion. Trevor was charismatic, conventionally handsome, and possessed exactly the kind of smooth social skills that Diana found increasingly absent in her intensely focused husband. Where Ryan was always analyzing, planning, and building for the future, Trevor was charming, present, and attentive to immediate emotional needs. Diana's attraction to Trevor began innocently enough. Casual conversations about company events, shared frustrations about being somewhat peripheral to the company's core operations, and gradually more personal discussions about feeling undervalued and overlooked. Trevor, recognizing both opportunity and genuine connection, carefully cultivated this relationship while maintaining perfect professional behavior in Ryan's presence. Ryan, completely absorbed in orchestrating the company's continued expansion, failed to notice the subtle shift in dynamics between his wife and the charming HR director. He was too busy building an empire to see that the foundation of his personal life was beginning to crack. As Hartwell Industries approached the $300 million revenue milestone, Ryan had created something remarkable, a business empire that seemed unstoppable. But he'd also created the conditions for a betrayal that would test every ounce of his strategic brilliance and ruthless determination. Chapter 3: Fractures and Deceptions. The warning signs were subtle at first, visible only to someone who knew Diana intimately. Ryan noticed her increased attention to appearance on seemingly ordinary workdays, her new habit of staying late for marketing consultations with Trevor, and her growing criticism of Ryan's work-life balance. But Ryan Morrison was a man who dealt in facts and concrete evidence, not suspicions and intuition. Diana's affair with Trevor Sullivan began 18 months before the confrontation that would change everything. What started as emotional comfort evolved into clandestine meetings, fabricated business trips, and an elaborate web of deception that both participants believed was invisible to the brilliant but preoccupied Ryan. They underestimated him completely. Ryan had built his success on understanding systems, relationships, and human behavior. He'd created a business empire by recognizing patterns others missed and anticipating consequences others couldn't foresee. These same skills made him acutely aware of changes in his personal environment, even when his conscious mind was focused elsewhere. He first noticed Trevor's behavioral shifts during board meetings. The man who had been professionally respectful became subtly challenging, asking questions that seemed designed to undermine Ryan's authority rather than understand his strategies. Trevor began making suggestions about company direction that were clearly beyond his HR expertise, positioning himself as someone with broader business insight. More tellingly, Diana's complaints about Ryan's work schedule increased precisely as the company hit new success milestones. When Hartwell Industries secured the massive Richardson Group contract, worth $60 million over 3 years, Diana's response wasn't celebration, but criticism about Ryan missing her cousin's wedding for negotiations. Ryan began documenting these patterns with the same methodical approach he used for business intelligence. He installed security cameras in his home office, reviewed company access logs, and quietly hired a private investigator, not to confirm his suspicions, but to understand the full scope of what he was dealing with. The evidence was damning and comprehensive. Trevor and Diana had been meeting regularly at the downtown Marriott, using company credit cards Trevor had access to for their expenses. They'd taken weekend trips to Chicago and Boston, supposedly for professional development seminars that Ryan's investigation revealed were fictional. But Ryan discovered something far more troubling than simple adultery. Trevor and Diana's conversations, captured by the investigators' surveillance, revealed plans that went beyond their affair. They discussed Ryan's inevitable downfall, speculated about Gregory eventually choosing Trevor as a successor, and fantasized about controlling Hartwell Industries together. Trevor had been systematically undermining Ryan's position with Gregory, planting seeds of doubt about the sustainability of Ryan's aggressive expansion strategies. He suggested that Ryan was becoming reckless, that the international operations were overextended, and that the company needed more traditional leadership to maintain stability. Gregory, already insecure about his diminished role, was receptive to these concerns. Trevor carefully positioned himself as the voice of prudent business judgment, someone who could help Gregory regain control of his own company. Their private conversations, which Trevor reported to Diana, revealed Gregory's growing determination to remove Ryan from power. Ryan absorbed this information with the cold calculation that had made him successful. He felt no emotional devastation, no romantic heartbreak, only a crystalline clarity about what needed to be done. Diana and Trevor had declared war on him without realizing their enemy was far more formidable than they'd imagined. Rather than confronting them immediately, Ryan began implementing countermeasures. He restructured key client relationships to create even stronger personal dependencies, moved critical operational knowledge to secure systems only he could access, and began quietly liquidating some of his more vulnerable investments to create liquid assets for the coming battle. Most importantly, Ryan started documenting everything. Every email, every contract, every client relationship, every strategic decision. He created comprehensive records that established his indispensable role in Hartwell Industries' success. He also began reaching out to headhunters and potential investors, not because he planned to leave, but because he wanted to understand his options and market value. The irony wasn't lost on him. While Trevor and Diana plotted to destroy his position, Ryan was actually strengthening it. Their deception had awakened a ruthless pragmatism that made him even more formidable than before. He'd built Hartwell Industries into a $400 million empire, but he'd done it while playing by Gregory's rules and maintaining family harmony. Now that those constraints were removed, Ryan began operating with complete strategic freedom. He started by creating additional dependencies within the company's operations. Key suppliers were locked into exclusive agreements that required his personal approval for modifications. Major clients signed extended service contracts that specifically named Ryan as the primary relationship manager. Critical operational systems were redesigned to require authorization codes that only Ryan possessed. When Gregory finally made his move, demanding Ryan's departure and threatening divorce, Ryan was ready. His calm response, "No problem, Dad. You'll be fine," wasn't bravado or denial. It was the confidence of someone who had spent months preparing for exactly this confrontation. The changes in paperwork Ryan made weren't desperate last-minute maneuvers. They were the activation of carefully laid contingency plans that would demonstrate to Gregory, Trevor, and Diana exactly who controlled Hartwell Industries' future. The 41 panic phone calls from Gregory the next day were just the beginning of their education in the true cost of betraying Ryan Morrison. Chapter 4. The Betrayal Unveiled. The confrontation came on a cold Thursday morning in November, exactly 3 years and 7 months after Ryan had joined Hartwell Industries. The company had just announced record quarterly profits of $142 million, making it one of the fastest-growing industrial manufacturers in the sector. Ryan arrived at the office expecting to discuss the Asian expansion timeline with Gregory, but instead found his father-in-law waiting with Trevor Sullivan and the company's longtime attorney, Bernard Walsh. "Ryan, sit down," Gregory commanded, his voice carrying an authority he hadn't exercised in months. "We need to talk." The office felt different, colder, more formal. Trevor sat slightly behind Gregory's desk, positioned as an advisor rather than subordinate. Walsh avoided eye contact, clearly uncomfortable with whatever script he'd been given. Ryan recognized the staging immediately. This was a corporate execution, carefully orchestrated and deliberately humiliating. "I've been thinking about the company's future," Gregory began, his words clearly rehearsed. We've grown too fast, taken on too much risk. The international expansion, these complex client relationships, all these dependencies you've created, it's not sustainable. Ryan listened without interruption, his expression neutral. He'd anticipated this conversation for weeks, had rehearsed his responses, and prepared for every possible variation of Gregory's attack. What surprised him wasn't the betrayal itself, but the amateurish way it was being executed. I'm restructuring the leadership team, Gregory continued. Trevor will be taking over business development and client relations. You've done good work here, but it's time for you to move on. Your aggressive style just doesn't fit our company culture anymore. The insult was deliberate, suggesting that Ryan was the problem, that his success had somehow been detrimental to the company he'd transformed. Trevor leaned forward slightly, unable to suppress a small smile of anticipated victory. There's one more thing, Gregory added, his voice dropping to a more personal tone. Diana wants a divorce. She's been unhappy for a long time. Feels like you've changed, become too obsessed with work. She deserves better than being married to someone who cares more about deals than family. This was the moment Ryan had been preparing for, the complete betrayal wrapped in righteous justification. Gregory wasn't just firing him. He was rewriting history to make Ryan the villain in his own success story. Ryan stood slowly, his movement deliberate and controlled. He looked at each man in turn. Gregory, trying to project authority he didn't actually possess. Trevor, barely containing his triumph. Walsh, clearly uncomfortable with his role in this corporate coup. Understand, Ryan said simply. You're right about one thing, Dad. I have changed. When I first joined this company, I thought family loyalty meant something. I thought building success together created bonds that couldn't be broken by jealousy or insecurity. He moved toward the window, looking out at the expanded parking lot filled with luxury cars belonging to employees whose positions existed only because of the growth he'd orchestrated. But you're also wrong about something important, Ryan continued, turning back to face them. You think you're firing me from your company. You think you're taking back control of Hartwell Industries. You think Trevor here is going to step into my role and maintain the relationships I've built. Gregory's expression shifted slightly, sensing something in Ryan's tone that didn't match the submissive departure he'd expected. The truth is, gentlemen, you're not just firing an employee. You're dismantling the foundation of everything this company has become. But don't worry about that now. You'll understand soon enough. Ryan smiled. Not the warm family smile Gregory remembered, but something colder, more calculating. No problem, Dad. You'll be fine. He shook hands with Walsh, nodded politely to Trevor, and gave Gregory a brief embrace that felt more like a threat than affection. Then he walked out of the office that had been his second home for nearly 4 years, leaving behind an empire he'd built and a family that had chosen to destroy him. But Ryan Morrison wasn't finished with Hartwell Industries. In fact, his real work was just beginning. 20 minutes after leaving the office, Ryan made the first call to his attorney, Marcus Pemberton, a corporate law specialist he'd been working with for months in preparation for this exact scenario. The conversation was brief and focused. Execute phase 1 immediately. Within 2 hours, 17 major clients received priority communications from Ryan's personal business consultancy, a company he'd registered 6 months earlier as Morrison Strategic Solutions. The messages were professional, respectful, and absolutely devastating to Hartwell Industries' immediate future. The Richardson Group received notice that their primary technical liaison, Ryan Morrison, was no longer with Hartwell Industries, and that their ongoing $60 million project might experience delays or complications as a result. Would they be interested in discussing alternative arrangements for project completion? Meridian Corporation learned that the custom optimization protocols they depended on for daily operations had been developed personally by Ryan Morrison, who was no longer available to provide ongoing support through Hartwell Industries. Morrison Strategic Solutions, however, would be happy to discuss direct consulting arrangements. Atlas Industries discovered that their critical equipment maintenance schedules and proprietary calibration procedures were managed through systems that required Ryan Morrison's personal authorization that was no longer available through Hartwell Industries. By 6 p.m. that evening, Gregory's phone had started ringing. By 8 p.m., he'd received 16 calls from panicked clients demanding explanations and immediate solutions. By 10 p.m., Trevor Sullivan was beginning to understand that managing business development involved more than attending meetings and reviewing reports. At midnight, Gregory Hartwell made the first of what would become 41 consecutive phone calls to Ryan Morrison. The calls went unanswered, but each voicemail grew more desperate, more pleading, more willing to negotiate. Ryan listened to the first few messages with satisfaction, then turned off his phone. Tomorrow, the real education would begin. Chapter 5. The Network Activation. Friday morning brought chaos to Hartwell Industries that no amount of corporate crisis management could contain. Ryan's strategic withdrawal wasn't just the departure of an executive. It was the systematic removal of the nervous system that kept the company functioning at its expanded capacity. The Asian operations were the first to feel the impact. The Malaysian facility, which generated $40 million annually, discovered that their quarterly parts orders couldn't be processed because the authorization codes had been changed. The Vietnamese manufacturing partnership needed immediate approval for a $3 million equipment modification, but the approval system required Ryan's digital signature. Trevor Sullivan arrived at the office at 7 a.m., determined to demonstrate his readiness to fill Ryan's role. By 9 a.m., he was drowning in problems he didn't understand and couldn't solve. The corporate phone system was overwhelmed with calls from clients, suppliers, and international partners, all demanding immediate attention for issues that seemed impossibly complex. Where are the client relationship files? Trevor demanded from Ryan's former assistant, Patricia Kim. Mr. Morrison kept the detailed relationship notes and contact protocols on his personal secure server. Patricia replied professionally. The company files have basic contract information, but the operational details and personal relationship history aren't accessible. Trevor stared at her in disbelief. What do you mean, not accessible? This is company information. Actually, sir, the relationship management system was Mr. Morrison's personal intellectual property. He licensed its use to Hartwell Industries, but the core data belongs to Morrison Strategic Solutions. This revelation sent Trevor rushing to Gregory's office, where he found his supposed ally fielding angry calls from their 3 largest clients. Gregory looked haggard, his usual composed demeanor completely shattered by the cascade of problems that seemed to multiply every hour. The Pinnacle account wants to terminate their contract, Gregory reported grimly. They say their operations depend on technical protocols that only Ryan understands. Cornerstone is threatening legal action if we can't maintain their optimization schedules. And Richardson Group is demanding immediate clarification about project continuity. Trevor felt panic rising in his chest. Can't we just hire back Ryan? Offer him more money, better terms? Gregory's laugh was bitter. I've called him 41 times since yesterday. He's not answering. His attorney sent a formal letter this morning stating that Morrison Strategic Solutions is prepared to honor existing client relationships, but only through direct consulting agreements that bypass Hartwell Industries entirely. The full scope of Ryan's preparation became clearer as the day progressed. The company's supplier relationships, which Ryan had carefully cultivated over 4 years, were structured with personal guarantee clauses that made Ryan individually responsible for contract fulfillment. Without his authorization, suppliers couldn't modify orders, adjust delivery schedules, or approve custom specifications. More devastatingly, Ryan had structured the international expansion financing through personal guarantees and relationships that made him indispensable to the debt arrangements. The Asian operations have been financed through a complex web of international partnerships where Ryan served as the primary relationship manager and operational guarantor. By noon, Hartwell Industries' stock price had dropped 12% as news of the management transition spread through industry networks. By 3 p.m., 3 major suppliers had suspended deliveries pending clarification of account management responsibilities. Diana, who had spent the morning celebrating her anticipated freedom with Trevor, began receiving panicked calls from her father by mid-afternoon. The reality of their situation was becoming undeniable. They hadn't just fired Ryan, They had systematically destroyed the infrastructure that made Hartwell Industries successful. Can he really do this? Diana asked Trevor during a private moment in his office. Can he just take all the clients and relationships? Trevor, who had spent the day discovering exactly how little he understood about Ryan's role, could only offer weak reassurances. It's probably just temporary disruption. We'll rebuild the relationships, bring in new talent. But even as he spoke, Trevor knew the situation was far worse than simple relationship management. Ryan hadn't just built client relationships. He had created operational dependencies that made Hartwell Industries essential to their clients' daily functions. More importantly, he had structured those dependencies so that his personal involvement was irreplaceable. The afternoon brought news that made their situation even more precarious. 3 of Hartwell's key engineering staff had submitted resignations, accepting positions with Morrison Strategic Solutions. 2 critical account managers followed suit, taking their institutional knowledge and client relationships with them. Patricia Kim delivered the final blow when she handed Gregory a formal notice that the proprietary software systems Ryan had developed for client relationship management, operational optimization, and international logistic coordination were licensed to Hartwell Industries on a month-to-month basis. Morrison Strategic Solutions was terminating those licenses effective immediately. What does this mean practically? Gregory demanded. It means, sir, that we lose access to the systems that manage $280 million worth of client relationships, track $40 million in international operations, and coordinate the supply chain for our core manufacturing processes. We'll need to rebuild these systems from scratch or find alternative solutions. Gregory stared at the notice in his hands, finally understanding the magnitude of what he'd done. He hadn't just fired his son-in-law. He had declared war on the person who had become Hartwell Industries' central nervous system. As the market closed on Friday, Hartwell Industries' stock had fallen 18%. Industry publications were reporting management chaos and operational disruptions at what had been one of the sector's most successful companies. Ryan Morrison, meanwhile, was working from his home office, fielding calls from clients eager to maintain their business relationships through his new consulting firm. The transition was proceeding exactly as he had planned: surgical, comprehensive, and utterly devastating to those who had betrayed him. Gregory's 41st phone call came at 11:47 p.m. This time, Ryan answered. "Hello, Dad," Ryan said calmly. "I understand you've been trying to reach me." Chapter 6. The Reckoning Begins. "Ryan, thank God." Gregory's voice was strained, desperate. "We need to talk. This whole situation has gotten out of hand." Ryan leaned back in his leather chair, looking out at the city lights from his home office. He'd been expecting this call for exactly 36 hours and 17 minutes. Long enough for Gregory to understand the scope of his miscalculation, but not long enough for him to find alternative solutions. "Has it gotten out of hand, Dad?" "From my perspective, everything is proceeding exactly as expected. Hartwell Industries made a management decision, and the market is responding accordingly. Don't play games with me, son. You know what you're doing to the company. You're destroying everything we built together." The irony in Gregory's words was perfect. Everything we built together? That's interesting. Yesterday you told me I didn't belong at Hartwell Industries. You said my aggressive style didn't fit the company culture. Now you're claiming joint ownership of the success. Gregory's silence stretched for several seconds. When he spoke again, his voice carried a pleading tone Ryan had never heard before. "Look, maybe I made a mistake. The stress of rapid growth, the pressure from the board, I wasn't thinking clearly. We can fix this. Come back. We'll restructure your position, give you more authority." "More authority?" Ryan's laugh was cold. "Dad, I created $450 million in value for Hartwell Industries. I built relationships that generate nearly 80% of your revenue. I designed operational systems that keep your entire Asian expansion functioning. Exactly what additional authority were you planning to offer me?" Trevor's voice came through in the background, clearly on speakerphone. "Ryan, we can work this out. This doesn't have to be adversarial." "Trevor." Ryan's tone brightened with false warmth. "How was your first day as Director of Business Development? Did you enjoy managing the Richardson Group crisis? How about explaining to Meridian Corporation why their optimization protocols suddenly stopped working? The silence from Trevor's end was answer enough. Here's what's going to happen, Ryan continued, his voice becoming businesslike. Morrison Strategic Solutions has received formal requests from 14 major clients to take over their accounts directly. We're prepared to honor their existing service requirements through new consulting agreements. Hartwell Industries is welcome to compete for those contracts, of course. You can't just steal our clients. Gregory exploded. Steal? Dad, these companies are asking me to continue providing services you apparently can't deliver. I spent 4 years building personal relationships based on trust and competence. Those relationships belong to me, not to Hartwell Industries. Ryan let that sink in before continuing. Besides, you fired me. You said my services weren't needed. Now you're upset that I'm offering those same services to clients who still want them. What do you want? Gregory asked, defeat creeping into his voice. Money? Ownership percentage? Just tell me what it will take to fix this. This was the moment Ryan had been orchestrating since the day he discovered Diana's affair. Everything had led to this conversation, this admission of complete dependency. I want you to understand something, Dad. For 4 years, I respected you. I treated you like family. I built your company into an empire while maintaining the fiction that you were still in charge. I did that out of love for Diana and respect for the Hartwell legacy. Ryan's voice hardened. But you chose to betray that respect. You chose to conspire with my wife's lover to destroy me. You chose to rewrite history and make me the villain in my own success story. Ryan, about Diana. Don't. The word cut through Gregory's attempt at explanation like a blade. I know about Trevor. I know about the affair. I know about your private conversations where you plan my removal. I know about Diana's fantasies of controlling the company with her new boyfriend. The silence on the other end was complete. So here's what's actually going to happen, Ryan continued. Morrison Strategic Solutions will take over the accounts that want to work with us directly. Our preliminary contracts suggest we'll be managing about $320 million in annual business by the end of next month. You're going to destroy us, Gregory whispered. No, Dad. You destroyed yourselves. I'm just building a new company with clients who value competence over family drama. Ryan ended the call and immediately dialed Marcus Pemberton, his attorney. How did the acquisition proposal go? Ryan asked. Better than expected. The Richardson Group is very interested in a direct partnership structure. Meridian Corporation wants to discuss exclusive consulting arrangements. And we've had 3 inquiries from companies about acquiring Hartwell Industries client contracts directly through us. Perfect. And the regulatory filings? All submitted. Morrison Strategic Solutions is now officially registered as a comprehensive industrial consulting firm. We have the legal framework to operate in all the same markets as Hartwell Industries. Monday morning would bring phase 2 of Ryan's plan, the systematic acquisition of everything valuable that Hartwell Industries had built, purchased at a fraction of its worth from a company that could no longer function without his involvement. But first, he had one more call to make. Diana had left 17 voicemails over the weekend, her tone progressing from angry to confused to desperate. It was time to complete her education in the cost of betrayal. Hello, Diana. He answered on the first ring. Ryan, we need to talk. This has gone too far. You're hurting innocent people. Innocent people? That's fascinating. Tell me, which innocent people are you worried about? Your father, who conspired to destroy my career. Trevor, who helped him plan my removal while sleeping with my wife. Or you, who's been lying to my face for 18 months. Diana's sob was audible through the phone. I made mistakes, but this isn't just about us anymore. You're destroying the company, people's jobs, the family legacy. The family legacy, Ryan repeated slowly. You mean the legacy I created by growing a $50 million company into a $450 million empire? That legacy, that's not fair. The company existed before you. Yes, it did. It was a small, stagnating business that your father was running into irrelevance. I transformed it into something remarkable, and now I'm going to transform it again. What do you mean? Ryan smiled, though she couldn't see it. I mean, Diana, that by the time I'm finished, there won't be a Hartwell Industries left to argue about. But don't worry, Morrison Strategic Solutions will be hiring. Trevor can apply for a position in our HR department. The pay won't be quite what he's used to, but we believe in giving people opportunities to prove themselves. The call ended in Diana's tears, but Ryan felt no satisfaction from her pain. This wasn't about emotional revenge. It was about justice, consequences, and building something new from the ashes of trust destroyed. Phase 2 would begin Monday morning, and by the end of the month, everyone involved would understand exactly what they had lost when they chose to betray Ryan Morrison. Chapter 7: Empire Rebuilt. Monday morning marked the beginning of what financial journals would later call the most surgical corporate dismantling in modern business history. Ryan Morrison didn't waste time with emotional satisfaction or petty revenge. He implemented a systematic acquisition strategy that was both legally unassailable and devastating in its effectiveness. Morrison Strategic Solutions opened its doors in a downtown Manhattan office building just 12 blocks from Hartwell Industries. The symbolism was deliberate, close enough for Gregory to see the gleaming corporate logo from his office window, but far enough to establish complete independence. Ryan's first move was to formalize the client relationships that had already begun transitioning. The Richardson Group signed an exclusive 5-year consulting agreement worth $75 million annually. Meridian Corporation restructured their operations around Morrison Strategic Solutions' comprehensive support services. Atlas Industries, Pinnacle Manufacturing, and Cornerstone Systems followed within the first week. But Ryan's strategy went beyond simply stealing Hartwell's clients. He was systematically dismantling the infrastructure that made Hartwell Industries viable while building a superior alternative that rendered the original company obsolete. The Asian operations were his masterstroke. The Malaysian and Vietnamese facilities that generated $80 million annually for Hartwell Industries were structured through partnerships that required Ryan's personal guarantees and operational oversight. Without his involvement, the facilities couldn't fulfill their production contracts or maintain their supply chain relationships. Ryan offered the Asian partners a choice: continue struggling with an increasingly dysfunctional Hartwell Industries, or transition to direct partnerships with Morrison Strategic Solutions. The decision was easy. Morrison could provide better service, more reliable support, and clearer communication than the chaos-ridden Hartwell organization. Within 3 weeks, Morrison Strategic Solutions had acquired effective control of $240 million in annual business that had previously flowed through Hartwell Industries. But Ryan wasn't finished. He was just getting started. "Sir, we have a problem," Patricia Kim reported during Ryan's morning briefing. Patricia had been the first Hartwell Industries employee to join Morrison Strategic Solutions, bringing with her institutional knowledge and client relationships that were invaluable during the transition. "What kind of problem?" Ryan asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. "Hartwell Industries is attempting to sue us for corporate theft, breach of fiduciary duty, and tortious interference with business relationships. Gregory filed the papers this morning." Ryan smiled. He'd been expecting this desperate legal maneuver for weeks. "Did you prepare the response package we discussed?" "Yes, sir. Documentation of all personal relationship development, proof that the intellectual property belongs to you individually, and evidence that all client transitions were initiated by client requests rather than our solicitation." "Perfect. Send it to Marcus Pemberton and tell him to file our countersuit for wrongful termination, breach of employment contract, and defamation. Also include the discrimination complaint. Gregory's firing me immediately after discovering my wife's affair creates an interesting legal liability. The legal battle would be expensive and protracted, but Ryan had advantages that Gregory couldn't match. Every client relationship, every operational system, every strategic partnership had been carefully documented and legally structured to protect Ryan's interests. More importantly, Ryan could afford a lengthy legal battle. Hartwell Industries, hemorrhaging money and clients daily, could not. The real psychological blow came through Trevor Sullivan's systematic destruction. Ryan didn't need to attack Trevor directly. He simply created conditions where Trevor's incompetence became undeniable. When Trevor attempted to rebuild client relationships, he discovered that the decision-makers he tried to contact were people Ryan had personally recruited and promoted. These individuals owed their careers to Ryan's mentorship and had no loyalty to Hartwell Industries as an institution. When Trevor tried to manage the Asian operations, he found himself dealing with partners who spoke limited English and had developed working relationships exclusively with Ryan. Critical production decisions required cultural understanding and technical knowledge that Trevor simply didn't possess. When Trevor attempted to replace Ryan's proprietary operational systems, he discovered that rebuilding them would cost approximately $15 million and take 18 months, time and money that Hartwell Industries couldn't afford. Diana watched her lover's confidence crumble under the pressure of responsibilities he'd never understood. The man who had seemed so sophisticated and capable in hotel rooms and private conversations revealed himself to be fundamentally out of his depth when faced with real business challenges. "Maybe we should just try to make peace with Ryan," Diana suggested during one of their increasingly strained conversations. Trevor's response was bitter. "He's not interested in peace. He's interested in destroying us." Trevor was wrong. Ryan wasn't interested in destroying them. He was interested in building something better from the resources they could no longer effectively manage. Their destruction was simply a natural consequence of their incompetence. By the end of the first month, Morrison Strategic Solutions had grown to 47 employees and was generating $28 million in monthly revenue. Hartwell Industries, meanwhile, had lost 60% of its client base and was facing severe cash flow problems. Gregory made increasingly desperate attempts to negotiate, offering Ryan partnerships, buyback agreements, and even majority ownership of Hartwell Industries. Each offer was politely declined. Ryan had no interest in salvaging Gregory's company. He was building something far superior. The final phase of Ryan's strategy involved acquiring Hartwell Industries' physical assets at liquidation prices. As the company's financial situation deteriorated, creditors began demanding payment, and suppliers suspended services. Gregory was forced to sell equipment, facilities, and intellectual property to meet immediate obligations. Morrison Strategic Solutions submitted competitive bids for every major asset sale, acquiring critical manufacturing equipment at 30 cents on the dollar. The Malaysian facility partnership was transferred directly to Morrison for the assumption of existing debt. The Vietnamese operations were restructured as a Morrison subsidiary. Within 6 months, Ryan had built a company that not only replaced Hartwell Industries, but significantly exceeded its capabilities. Morrison Strategic Solutions generated $380 million in annual revenue, employed 180 people, and maintained operational facilities across 3 continents. Hartwell Industries, reduced to a skeleton operation managing $60 million in legacy contracts, was effectively a shell of its former self. Gregory had managed to save the company's legal existence, but its substance, everything valuable that had made it successful, now belonged to Ryan Morrison. The transformation was complete, but Ryan's personal reckoning with those who had betrayed him was just beginning. Chapter 8: Personal Consequences. The destruction of Hartwell Industries was only the opening movement in Ryan's symphony of retribution. The systematic dismantling of the company had been methodical and impersonal, a business response to a business betrayal. But Diana and Trevor's personal betrayal required a more intimate form of justice. Diana discovered the true scope of her situation when she attempted to file for divorce 6 months after Ryan's departure from Hartwell Industries. Her attorney, Robert Chun, delivered news that shattered her remaining illusions about financial security and social status. "Mrs. Morrison, we have significant problems with your divorce filing," Chun reported during their consultation. "Your husband's assets are far more complex and protected than we initially understood." Diana shifted uncomfortably in the expensive leather chair. "What do you mean? I know about his company, but we've been married for 5 years. I'm entitled to half of everything under state law." "That's correct, but the challenge is determining what actually constitutes marital property. Your husband has been extraordinarily careful about asset protection and legal structure." Chun spread documents across the conference table, revealing the intricate web of legal protections Ryan had built around his wealth. Morrison Strategic Solutions was structured as a series of interlocking entities, consulting firms, holding companies, and international partnerships that made asset valuation nearly impossible. More problematically, Chun continued, "Your husband has evidence of adultery, which affects spousal support calculations. He's also claiming that your affair was conducted using marital assets and company resources, which creates potential reimbursement obligations." Diana felt panic rising in her chest. What does that mean practically? It means instead of receiving a substantial settlement, you might owe your husband money. The hotel bills, travel expenses, and personal charges associated with your affair were paid using credit cards and accounts that legally belong to both of you. Your husband is claiming financial damage from your misuse of marital assets. The legal strategy was brilliant in its cruelty. Ryan wasn't just denying Diana access to his wealth. He was making her affair financially catastrophic for her personally. Every romantic dinner, every weekend getaway, every gift she'd exchanged with Trevor became evidence of financial misconduct. Trevor faced his own reckoning as Hartwell Industries' collapse accelerated. His position as director of business development became meaningless when there was no business left to develop. Gregory, desperate to cut costs, eliminated Trevor's position 8 months after Ryan's departure. "I'm sorry, Trevor," Gregory said during the termination meeting. "We simply can't afford your salary anymore. The consulting agreements you were supposed to rebuild never materialized. The client relationships haven't recovered. We need to reduce overhead just to survive." Trevor stared at the severance package: 2 weeks' pay and immediate termination of benefits. Less than a year earlier, he'd been planning to take over Ryan's role and marry the boss's daughter. Now he was unemployed, associated with a failed company, and romantically involved with a woman whose divorce was becoming a financial disaster. His attempts to find new employment revealed how completely Ryan had contaminated his professional reputation. Industry contacts who might have been interested in Trevor's skills were aware of his role in Hartwell Industries' collapse. More damagingly, they knew he'd been hired by Ryan Morrison and then participated in Ryan's removal, a betrayal that made Trevor unemployable in their close-knit professional community. "I'm sorry, Trevor," explained Jennifer Walsh, a headhunter who had previously placed him at Hartwell Industries. "Your resume is strong, but your involvement in the Morrison situation makes you a liability. No executive wants to hire someone who's known for undermining their supervisor." The social consequences were equally devastating. Diana and Trevor found themselves increasingly isolated from the professional and social circles they'd taken for granted. Country club memberships, charity board positions, and invitation lists that had defined their social status all evaporated as their association with the Hartwell Industries disaster became public knowledge. Diana's father, watching his life's work reduced to ruins, blamed her increasingly openly for the catastrophe. "If you hadn't destroyed your marriage," Gregory raged during one particularly bitter argument, "Ryan would still be family. He would never have done this to us." The accusation was both unfair and accurate. Diana's affair had provided the catalyst for Ryan's transformation from family member to enemy, but Gregory's own jealousy and insecurity had made the confrontation inevitable. Trevor and Diana's relationship, built on excitement and mutual attraction, couldn't survive the stress of unemployment, financial hardship, and social exile. Their romantic fantasy collapsed under the weight of real-world consequences, replaced by mutual blame and resentment. "This is all your fault," Trevor accused during one of their final arguments. "You said your husband wouldn't find out. You said your father would support us. You said we'd be running the company together." Diana's response was equally bitter. "You said you could replace Ryan. You said you understood the business. You said the clients would work with you instead of him." Both accusations were accurate. They had both been delusional about their abilities and naive about Ryan's capabilities. Their affair had been built on shared resentment and mutual overconfidence, foundations that crumbled when tested by reality. Meanwhile, Ryan continued building Morrison Strategic Solutions into a global consulting empire. The company's success was featured in business magazines, case studies, and industry conferences. Ryan himself became a sought-after speaker and consultant, his reputation enhanced rather than damaged by the Hartwell industry situation. The contrast was intentional and devastating. While Diana struggled with legal bills and social isolation, Ryan acquired a penthouse apartment and vacation home in the Hamptons. While Trevor remained unemployed and increasingly desperate, Ryan hired top talent from across the industry, offering compensation packages that reflected Morrison Strategic Solutions' exceptional profitability. The message was clear. Choosing to betray Ryan Morrison had consequences that extended far beyond professional disappointment. It meant exclusion from the world of success, influence, and prosperity that Ryan now controlled. But Ryan's retribution was far from complete. The public humiliation and financial consequences were only the beginning of what he had planned for those who had destroyed his trust and betrayed his loyalty. Chapter 9. Final Justice. 2 years after the confrontation that destroyed Hartwell Industries, Ryan Morrison stood in his corner office overlooking Manhattan, reviewing acquisition proposals from 3 international manufacturing conglomerates interested in purchasing Morrison Strategic Solutions. The company he'd built from his home office had grown into an $800 million enterprise with operations across 4 continents and partnerships with Fortune 500 companies worldwide. The irony wasn't lost on him. The betrayal that was meant to destroy his career had instead liberated him to build something far greater than he'd ever imagined possible within the constraints of family loyalty and corporate politics. His assistant knocked and entered. "Mr. Morrison, you have a visitor. Gregory Hartwell is here. He says it's urgent." Ryan hadn't seen his former father-in-law in 8 months, though he'd been monitoring Hartwell Industries' continued decline through industry publications and financial reports. The company was now operating at a loss, managing fewer than 12 active accounts, and facing bankruptcy within 6 months. "Send him in," Ryan decided. This conversation had been inevitable since the day he'd walked out of Gregory's office. Gregory entered looking 20 years older than his actual age. The stress of watching his life's work collapse had taken a visible toll. Gray hair, deep lines around his eyes, and a defeated posture that spoke of complete exhaustion. "Ryan," Gregory began, his voice barely above a whisper, "thank you for seeing me." "Sit down, Gregory." The use of his first name instead of Dad was deliberate, establishing the formal distance that now existed between them. "I came to ask for your help," Gregory continued, settling into the chair across from Ryan's desk. "The company is finished. We'll be filing for bankruptcy next month unless something changes." Ryan remained silent, allowing Gregory to continue. "I know what I did was wrong. I let jealousy and insecurity cloud my judgment. I believed Trevor's lies about your being a threat to the company's stability. I participated in destroying the best thing that ever happened to Hartwell Industries." "You did more than participate, Gregory. You orchestrated it. You planned my removal, you chose my replacement, and you delivered the message personally." Gregory nodded, tears forming in his eyes. "I know. I take full responsibility. But I'm not here just for myself. There are still 43 employees at Hartwell Industries. They're going to lose their jobs because of my mistakes." This was the moment Ryan had been anticipating, the complete acknowledgement of responsibility and the appeal to his sense of mercy. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Ryan asked. "Buy the company. Purchase our remaining assets, take over our contracts, and save the jobs. I'll transfer my ownership stake for whatever you think is fair. I just want to minimize the damage to innocent people." Ryan leaned back in his chair, considering the proposal. "And what about Diana? What about Trevor? Are they part of this rehabilitation fantasy?" Gregory's expression hardened slightly. Diana is no longer my concern. The divorce was finalized last month. She's received nothing beyond what the courts ordered for immediate support, which amounts to very little given the circumstances. And Trevor hasn't worked in the industry since I let him go. Last I heard, he was managing a retail store in Ohio. His reputation is finished. Ryan stood and walked to his window, looking down at the busy street below. After a long moment, he turned back to Gregory. "I'll make you an offer, Gregory, but comes with conditions you might find unacceptable." "Name them." First, Morrison Strategic Solutions will acquire Hartwell Industries' remaining assets for the amount of outstanding debt, approximately $12 million. This covers your creditors, but leaves you with nothing. Gregory nodded. Acceptable. Second, I'll retain the 43 employees and honor their existing benefit packages. They're not responsible for your mistakes. Thank you. Third, you'll sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement about all business operations, client relationships, and strategic information you learned during my employment. You'll also provide a written confession acknowledging your role in the conspiracy to remove me from the company. Gregory hesitated. A confession? Full documentation of your discussions with Trevor, your knowledge of Diana's affair, and your decision to terminate my employment based on personal rather than professional considerations. I want a complete record of what happened and why. That's professionally humiliating. Gregory, you're about to lose everything you spent 40 years building. Professional humiliation is the least significant consequence you're facing. After several minutes of consideration, Gregory nodded. Acceptable. Fourth and finally, Ryan continued, you'll have no ongoing role in the company or its operations. You'll receive no consulting fees, no advisory positions, no involvement of any kind. Hartwell Industries will become a Morrison Strategic Solutions subsidiary, and you'll be permanently excluded from its management. The final condition was the most bitter. Gregory would be forced to watch someone else control the company that bore his family name, manage relationships he'd spent decades building, and direct operations he'd created from nothing. Understand, Gregory said quietly. When can we finalize the agreement? The paperwork will be ready tomorrow. You can sign it, collect your personal belongings, and close this chapter of your life. Gregory stood to leave, then turned back. Ryan, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. You deserve better from all of us. You're right, Gregory. I did deserve better. But your betrayal taught me something valuable. Family loyalty is only worth maintaining when it's mutual. When it becomes one-sided, it becomes weakness. After Gregory left, Ryan called his attorney to begin the acquisition process. Within 2 weeks, Morrison Strategic Solutions had absorbed Hartwell Industries' remaining operations, integrated its employees, and eliminated the last vestige of the company that had once defined the Hartwell family legacy. Diana attempted contact several times over the following months, sending letters and messages asking for reconciliation or at least civil communication. Ryan never responded. She had made her choice when she decided that Trevor Sullivan was more appealing than her marriage, and Ryan never gave second chances to people who betrayed his trust. Trevor's fate was perhaps the most fitting. His association with the Hartwell Industries disaster made him permanently unemployable in their industry. He eventually moved back to his hometown in Ohio, managing a small electronics store and living with the knowledge that his affair with Diana had cost him any chance of professional success. 5 years after the confrontation that destroyed Hartwell Industries, Ryan Morrison was featured on the cover of Forbes magazine as the executive who built an empire from betrayal. The article detailed how his removal from a family company had catalyzed the creation of one of the most successful consulting firms in American business history. Ryan kept the magazine cover framed on his office wall, not as a trophy of revenge, but as a reminder that the best